Hi, everyone. We're going to get started now. Welcome to the final Environment Committee meeting before a summer break. We'll resume back in the fall. Councillor Curry has indicated that they're at the Hydro Ottawa board meeting today. I believe everyone else is here, but we'll start with a roll call. Chris?
Councillor Brockington. Here. Councillor Brown.
Here.
Councillor Devine. Councillor Devine, okay. Councillor Hill. Present. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Here.
Councillor King. Here. Councillor Luloff.
Present.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Vice Chair Carr.
Here.
You have quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I want to start by recognizing that we're on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people for our meeting today. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to confirmation of minutes. The minutes were issued separately and uploaded to SharePoint on the portal on Friday, June 16th. Are the minutes 4 of the Environment and Climate Change Committee meeting of Monday, June 5th confirmed? Thank you for that. We've got a few responses to inquiries that are on the agenda. I understand Councillor Brockington on the rat mitigation. I know Councillor Tierney has had one on that too around rats in Beacon Hill, Cedarville. And I understand there's a motion to lift that item onto the agenda. I understand it'll be short. If it's short, we can do it right away. And if not, we'll do it at the end of the agenda. So just a couple questions, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair.
And we'll just do a motion to get it on the agenda here from Vice Chair Carr.
That pursuant to subsection 89.3 of the procedure bylaw, being bylaw number 2022-410, the Environment and Climate Change Committee approved that the rules of procedure be suspended to allow for the consideration of the item listed as item 4, responses to inquiries, OCC 202306, rat mitigation, 4.3 CPS 0422, rats in Beacon Hill, Cedarville.
Okay, is that carried?
Carried.
Okay. Thank you very much. So Councillor Brockington, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues. I was happy to see the reply to the inquiry from staff that indicated a reconstitution of the working group. There's been a lot of feedback, obviously, that led up to this, but since this was released, a number of inquiries within my ward and across other wards. And the question, Chair, is simple. People would like to know that the working group is going to be action oriented, and there is a desire to understand how the workings of this working group will be made known to, I guess, this committee, whether the working group intends to report through this committee. People are very keen to understand how the city can be more engaged in rat mitigation. And I guess it's more of a governance type question. How will the actions and the decisions of the working group be communicated outward, either through this committee or publicly? Thank you.
Okay, over to Steph. I know we had a briefing on this.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the working group has been reestablished and it's a multidisciplinary group. So we have members from across the city, including from planning, from public works, infrastructure and water services, and bylaw services. We're also including our partners, which are Ottawa Community Housing and Ottawa Public Health. So the intention of the working group is to work in collaboration to identify best practices and to collect data. So we are going to have a centralized complaint line that people can send emails to, and working with 311 to better understand, where the complaints are coming from and to identify specific actions for those specific neighborhoods. If it's direction from council or from committee, we can report back on an annual basis if that's the preferred approach, but we're open to suggestions on how you would like to have that information reported back.
Yeah, thank you. I think that what I'm looking for me to be able to communicate back to my residents is, given that we're just going into summer and rat inquiries and issues across many wards will continue is how will the city be more engaged in assisting on particular private property, the issue of rats, because to date, once the city hears it's private property, they sort of back off. And so that's where I'm trying to tease out of the working group is what type of concrete actions can we expect from the working group to assist communities that are reporting a higher concentration of rats than normal. And the expectation is that's going to be sooner rather than later. So I almost want to see a report back in September, Chair, with an update on how the working group fared over the summer months, because I've got to report back to my community. So, I mean, I don't mind working with staff offline after today, but something has to change, and that's why it was raised. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, no, can appreciate that. And I know there's a kind of list of actions that the city can take with regard to mitigating this issue in many wards. Helpful to go through that. I know I see other hands up now, so maybe a longer item than we anticipated. Councillor Kavanaugh, Councillor King, and then Councillor Tierney. Yeah, Councillor Kavanaugh, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Councillor Brockington, for raising this. This is something that's been happening in my ward as well, and it seems to be related to construction, and that seems to be, and that's a speculation perhaps, but that's the pattern, and I'd like to learn more about it. Obviously, we want to mitigate. Ottawa Public Health has excellent notes on it, and we hand them out regularly. But sometimes and as Councillor Brockington is saying, if it's on private property, we want people to focus on what they can do, but sometimes it's in our parks, and we're getting sightings there as well. So we need to work on that as well, and I hope we'll have that kind of focus, because parks are a concern, especially if we don't have garbage picked up immediately. So is there conversation with or coordination with the Parks and Rec on that?
Mr. Chair, yes, through you to the councillor. The working group will include people from Public Works as well as from Rec and Culture, or Recreation and Facilities, I think is their name. So yes, we will have representatives from both of those areas to address any concerns and issues that may arise in those locations.
I appreciate it. So just to let you know that it is something that we've been hearing for a few years here, and it seems to be picking up, and that's not good news. So hopefully we can work on this together. One thing I want to raise that is, would we consider some kind of bylaw about leaving food out? Because that seems to obviously be the big problem, is feeding and where they get food sources. And, notwithstanding the excellent recommendations from Ottawa Public Health, there is food left out at times. And I've seen that Toronto has very strict laws about feeding wildlife. Would we consider that as well?
Mr. Chair, yes. We are looking at best practices in other municipalities across Canada and into the US, and definitely education about food, garbage storage, but realizing that food also includes bird seed and bird feeders. So, there needs to, and that's where we will target those specific neighborhoods, because perhaps bird feeders need to be removed at certain times of infestation and other strategies as that. So we will be coming back with a bunch of options depending on what the issue is in the neighborhood that we are seeing.
The Toronto bylaw counts for bird feeders and has restrictions on it. So it's something to look at. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor King?
Thank you, Chair, and I just want to express appreciation both to Councillor Brockington and Tierney for bringing this inquiry forward, and to staff for the establishment of the working group. My question really refers to the scope of work. I know in the last term of council, there was a rats complaint inquiry that also went to Community and Protective Services Committee. And there was, I believe that motion did pass, and there was supposed to be work undertaken by staff to assess the options around implementing a program for proactive rat baiting in terms of construction projects, also concerning demolition permits. And that there was supposed to be the pursuit of policy change around the Building Code Services Act to require and enforce proactive rat baiting. So I'm just wondering if that work will continue under the working group.
Mr. Chair, absolutely. So bylaw is part of our working group, as is the planning department. So we will look at all of the strategies that are available to us within our current bylaws and see if there's potential for adapting them for improvements.
Excellent. Just wanted to make sure that that wasn't getting lost, because I think that that report was submitted to Committee and Protective Services Committee in the last term. So since we're before Environment Committee, just want to ensure the continuity of that work. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor King. Appreciate that. Councillor Tierney, then Councillor Luloff.
Great, and thank you, Chair. And even though this is technically Riley's, rats aren't exclusive to Beacon Hill, so I'll just be very brief and make note of the fact that I've witnessed over the years how it's changed, and I've continued to learn a lot. A lot of our new council colleagues didn't realize the 3 departments that are involved that have to coordinate to make this all happen. And I'm very happy to hear about the centralized line. I think that's really important to be able to get that information to target, because the Pied Piper is not going to get these things out of our city. So I just want to thank staff that will continually work hard, because it's not sewer rats anymore, they're surface rats. And it's creating a lot of problems, but I just want to thank staff for all their hard work on this. Thank you, Chair.
Absolutely. There's a big education component to this as well with residents. Really appreciate that, Councillor Tierney. Councillor Luloff.
Thank you very much. Having the dubious distinction of having the most rat complaints in the city in 2022, I wanted to chime in on this. I had the GM come out and do a walkabout in our neighborhoods where we were receiving the most complaints. So between January 1st and August 21st, 2022, Orleans had 100 rat complaints and 115 the year before for the entire year. This is becoming a major problem. Councillor Tierney's ward is actually 15th on the list. This is a massive problem across the city. And so what we've been telling residents is, rats need 3 things to survive, right? Shelter, food, and water. So get rid of your bird baths, get rid of your bird seeds, any piles that you have outside, even wood piles, move them, either into your garage or make sure that they're covered or don't have any debris whatsoever outside. And then we would go and bait the sewer on the street. 6 months later, that bait is still there. So the rats are not going into the sewer anymore to drink, which is what we had originally thought. What other mitigation methods are there? I've got one resident who backs onto the highway. He caught 78 rats in his backyard with his own rat trap last year. That is disgusting. These are vectors of disease. There's several news articles about this, and they feel like the city is doing absolutely nothing to help them and are saying, well, this is a private property issue. You've obviously got something going on in your backyard. But then when I walk around with the GM, we're looking at hedges, we're looking at everything. Everything is well kept. There's no debris on the side of the house. And then he just kind of scratches his head and says, like, well, listen, this is the previous GM. Scratches his head and said, well, like, I really don't know what more we can tell people, because they're doing all of the things that we're telling them to do. So, I mean, if you had a resident that's, if you were speaking to this resident who caught all these rats in their backyard, what should I be telling him? What more can he be doing?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's such a complex problem, and I really sympathize for people who are experiencing that. And we've certainly seen that in Councillor Brockington's ward as well, where, we tried to do baiting, and it just as in your neighborhood, they didn't take up the baits. And that's where it has to be a multi-pronged approach, and it's getting buy-in from everyone within the community. everyone has to do their part. Everyone has to, manage their green bin waste appropriately, remove their bird feeders, trim their bushes so that they're 2 feet off the ground. And but it's not an easy solution. And, we're certainly going to be here to help, but I don't think we have any hard and fast answers, unfortunately. But we will collectively, throughout all the various departments in the city, work together to try and mitigate this problem.
Will the city be considering extermination?
At this point, the standard clause is we do not exterminate on private property. But, and we've tried extermination in the sewers. I mean, we will look at other opportunities and best practices in other communities and see what we can implement here. So, I'm not going to say it's on the table. I'm not going to say it's off the table at this point.
Is this a bigger problem now than it has been over the course of the last, since amalgamation? Like looking at the data, are you getting more complaints about rats, today than we were back in the year 2000 or 2001?
My actual sense is that this year the complaints are coming down. I mean, we've had a lot of media around it, and so I think there are some complaints coming in, but I think some of it was people being at home, working from home, and more aware of what was happening in their community. But yeah, we continue to take the 311 data and that will be really our bellwether of how we're doing is, are the complaints going up or down?
Okay, we're very, very concerned about this issue. I mean, somebody catching that many rats in their backyard, this is somebody who's been retired for 20 years. So, I mean, I don't necessarily buy that, this is just from people working from home. I think that this is becoming a major issue, and I certainly look forward to, seeing what sort of measures that we can take. Because I can imagine that this list that I have of the amount of complaints was published in CTV News. I can imagine that given the interest of people or the wards that were once at the bottom of the list in 2002, that this is becoming an issue that's a little bit more widespread than we would have thought before. Yes, Councillor Tierney was clear that it seems to be highly concentrated in areas that are seeing a lot of construction. That's certainly not the case for Councillor Brockington's ward, at least not the same sort of disruptive work that's happening, on the 174 corridor. I don't know, maybe you've got a lot of utilities going in like we do as well, but it seems that no matter where there's construction, we're seeing the disturbance of natural habitats of rats. These are highly undesirable creatures, and definitely want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to not be providing room for them to grow and breed. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Luloff. And can we receive this item, the committee?
Received.
Okay, thank you very much. There was a postponement and deferral of the Taywin tree cutting matter, deferred from the Monday, June 5th meeting, and there was a request to lift that on the agenda. I understand that since then that response to inquiry has been reviewed. That member does not wish to speak to this item. So can we receive this item? I understand there's reports back coming from the 6-month timeline previously on this issue. So can we receive this item?
Received.
Thank you very much. On the alternate locate agreements, I don't believe we have a presentation on this matter. There are no delegations that have signed up on this matter. Can we carry this, or would committee like to hold it? Quick question. Maybe you want to do that. I can hold and come back if it's. If there are other questions on it, or no? Okay, let's do a quick question.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very quick question. I was just interested in how much will we save by utilizing alternative locates?
Mr. Chair, that's a good question. I'm not sure that we'll save a lot of money. I think the savings will be in time. Right now, the province has a stopwatch when we do locates. And last year, we really struggled to meet the objectives that were set by the province. And this is just an excellent tool that will give us a little more flexibility in achieving the time limits that are established.
No, I appreciate that. That was my short question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor King. Okay, can we carry this item? Thanks very much. So the next item is the Urban Forest Management Plan update. We have 7 speakers registered for this item who will get to after we receive a staff presentation. So I'll ask staff to come up and give that presentation. And after that time, councillors can introduce motions after the presentation, then we'll get to those speakers.
Testing my microphone. Can anybody hear it?
Sorry, Councillor Devine, I couldn't hear you.
Good. I was just testing my microphone, but you can hear me now?
We can.
Thank you. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks for being here, and over to you on the Urban Forest Management Plan update report.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. My name is Martha Copestake. I'm a senior forester in the Natural Systems and Rural Affairs team in Planning, Real Estate and Economic Development. I'm joined today by my colleague Tracy Schwetz, who manages the Forest Management Branch in the Public Works Department. Also joining us today are Nick Stowe, who's the Program Manager for Natural Systems and Rural Affairs, Alain Gontier, the General Manager of Public Works, and Don Herwire, the General Manager of Planning. We're here today to present the Urban Forest Management Plan update report. This is a joint project between Planning and Public Works. I will be presenting on behalf of both departments this morning, and Tracy and I will be happy to take questions after the presentation. Oh, oops. No. Am I switching these slides? No. Okay. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I should have checked that out first. Okay, so putting down roots for the future is Ottawa's 20-year strategic urban forest management plan. It was approved by Council in 2017 and implementation started in 2018. The plan is broken down into 5 four-year management periods, which align with the terms of Council. The UFMP identified 26 recommendations or projects to guide and improve Ottawa's urban forest management. And those projects were initially slotted into work plans for the first 2 management periods. The UFMP, of course, is jointly implemented by our 2 departments, Public Works and Planning, and the plan is based on the concept of adaptive management. So at the end of each 4-year management period, a review is completed to assess the status of implementation of the plan's recommendations. This includes considering new or ongoing challenges and opportunities related to the urban forest. And from this, a work plan is developed for the next management period. And this, of course, is what the report we are discussing today outlines. We can change the slide. Ottawa's UFMP is a community-built plan. Over the 2 years of its development, a large-scale public consultation was carried out that provided opportunities to engage with hundreds of residents and stakeholders. The input of stakeholder groups was actively taken into account in the development of the plan, and the plan was made much better for it. The plan provides the city with a structured approach to managing Ottawa's urban forest. The UFMP has put a sharp focus on the value of the urban forest. Staff are observing a much broader recognition for the important role that the urban forest plays in public health, both physical and mental, and climate change mitigation, as well as all of the other associated benefits of trees in cities. There seems to be a greater commitment to the urban forest now. A theme during the consultations on the UFMP, and then again on the tree bylaw review, was the need for a culture change to better value trees in Ottawa. Acknowledgement of this need has helped staff tackle some systemic barriers, and that has enabled an overall better integration of trees into decision-making and planning and development scenarios and beyond. Of course, there's still work to do, but staff are now seeing this culture change in action. We can change the slide. The first management period of the UFMP is now complete, and the second management period is starting. This is the first update report on the UFMP, and it includes descriptions of the work accomplished so far, highlights of successes and an overview of the challenges, and a detailed work plan for the second management period. We can change the slide. The work done in the first management period focused on, tree protection, data collection, and integration. The feature project of the first management period was a tree bylaw review, which resulted in the development and implementation of a new tree protection bylaw for Ottawa. The project was focused on improving the protection of trees in the urban area of Ottawa, specifically in infill development scenarios, by developing an integrated approach to tree protection with transparent tree permitting. The result of this project was a new harmonized tree bylaw and an extensive overhaul of the processes to implement the bylaw. There's more detail in the staff report on the changes that were made. The new tree protection bylaw came into effect on January 1st, 2021, right in the pandemic. And 2 years in, the implementation of the bylaw is going well. Staff are seeing better tree protection and infill development. And at a site level, staff have been able to identify trees for protection and retention early in the process and identify tree planting locations as well. Trees are being retained now that would not have been in the past. Staff will continue to closely monitor the implementation of the tree bylaw to ensure the tree protection goal is being realized. In terms of data collection, a baseline canopy cover assessment was completed in Ottawa in the first management period using aerial photos from 2017. This was a joint project with the NCC and the City of Gatineau. The canopy cover was mapped for the full National Capital Region. This provides a baseline data set for Ottawa to use for future comparisons over time. The canopy cover for Ottawa is broken down across the city by ward and by neighborhood. The tree canopy coverage for Ottawa's urban area was found to be 31%, but it varies substantially across the ward. It's not equitably distributed. Staff will complete the canopy cover assessment every 5 years, and we've already begun the first reassessment. This will track Ottawa's progress towards the city's 40% canopy cover target over time. We can change the slide. And in terms of the integration piece, this one seems a little less exciting, but it's actually pretty important. The purpose of the integration work is to foster a more tree-aware culture by expanding awareness internally among city staff who make decisions that may affect the urban forest. So this is behind the scenes stuff. This work has shifted the culture on trees and helped to expand internal awareness on the policies in place to protect and enhance the urban forest. So I'll go over a few examples of this integration. To start with, staff worked with policy planners to better value trees in the policy framework of the new official plan, including a new set of urban forest policies, which set that new canopy cover target of 40%. Tree information reports were introduced as a requirement into the review and approval of committee of adjustment files for the urban area, and forestry inspectors were better integrated into the building permit review process for applications for small infill development. Planning and Public Works foresters also worked with zoning planners to introduce a landscape-first approach to zoning for infill development. This resulted in a zoning requirement for front yard soft landscaped areas, which are sufficiently sized to allow space for trees, existing or newly planted. This was applied to zoning for all neighborhoods within the Greenbelt, and a similar approach was then applied in both the Westboro and R4 zoning projects for rear yards as well. This landscape-first approach is fundamental to ensuring space is provided for trees in residential development scenarios. Foresters will continue to work with the zoning team to advance the integration of trees into the new zoning bylaw. And the last integration piece that I'll mention is the integration of foresters into the project to update the local street cross sections. For many years, the challenge was to ensure that space was made for all competing elements in the right-of-way. The foresters helped to provide information on trees, soil volume, and required offsets. The resulting revised road cross sections include the use of a joint utility trench under the sidewalks and adequate setbacks to curbs, sidewalks, and foundations to support tree planting along streets with enough space for the soil volume needed for the trees to grow to their full potential. So this integration piece is pretty important foundational type work, and it will be built on in the next management period. We can go to the next slide. So I've gone over the feature projects, but there was quite a bit of other work done as well. And it's all outlined in the table in document 1 of our staff report, but I'll just briefly go over a few more. So we also began work to integrate urban forest resources into the city's asset management reporting. Staff developed a forested areas maintenance strategy for city-owned forest, and forestry staff began to pilot an early pruning program for newly planted trees. And this past fall, a stewardship and outreach coordinator position was created within the forest management unit in Tracy's group. Next slide, please. The implementation of the first management period came with several challenges and lessons learned. The biggest challenge was that staffing capacity was not sufficient for the work plan. The work plan for the first management period was quite large, and it was not possible to complete all the items listed within the available resources. Staff have learned that current resources provide capacity to manage just one large project at a time. Extreme weather, of course, was also a major challenge. Ottawa and the surrounding areas contended with an increase in serious weather events over the last 5 years, which has had a large impact on the urban forest. These events included, of course, several tornadoes, a derecho, and more recently, an ice storm. Along with several years of spring flooding, these weather events were high-impact events that were a drain on the capacity of forestry staff. And this is all in addition to the impacts due to the pandemic as well. In the case of the derecho, many staff in forestry paused their regular work for months for storm recovery efforts. This delays the implementation of regular programming such as tree maintenance and tree planting, and also the UFMP project work. As well, in the past few years, there's been a substantial increase in interest in Ottawa's urban forest. It's clear that the important role that trees play in cities is now broadly understood, and the expectations for Ottawa's urban forest are high. This is a good thing, an absolutely good thing. However, this increased attention means an increase in communication on trees, and I'm sure you're seeing that in your offices as well, for forestry staff and both planning and public works. This puts additional pressures on staff, and it often intensifies around these extreme weather events. Several projects that were scheduled to be done in the first management period were not started due to these challenges. And these projects are included within the work plan for the second management period. Next slide, please. The work plan for the second management period will build on the foundation set in the first management period, and it will take a slight pivot to focus on tree planting, tree maintenance, and outreach and engagement. The feature project is a tree planting strategy for Ottawa. Next slide, please. The tree planting strategy will focus on how the city will achieve the new canopy cover target of 40% over time. Getting to 40% canopy cover in Ottawa will require everyone's participation. Homeowners, renters, business owners, developers, institutions like schools, the NCC, and other government agencies. It needs to be all hands on deck to grow Ottawa's tree canopy. The tree planting strategy will be action focused, and it will shift the city's approach to tree planting from reactive to proactive. It will use a neighborhood lens and the city's canopy cover data to prioritize tree planting in the areas of the city that need it the most. It will take an equity approach by looking at socioeconomic factors and public health data, such as urban heat mapping, to prioritize tree planting efforts. And key to the tree planting strategy will be the ongoing integration, culture shifting work to make systemic improvements to remove barriers to tree planting in Ottawa. Next slide, please. Some of the elements that will be part of the tree planting strategy include a review of existing tree planting programs and the creation of new programs, for example, to get trees planted in backyards, depaving projects in areas that lack plantable space, and proactive identification of planting locations on city properties, such as the city right-of-way. A focus on planting larger sized trees known as caliper trees in the urban area. And opportunities will also be explored to leverage funding through partnerships, grants, sponsorships, and other elements like that. The idea is that the tree planting strategy actions will be rolled out for approval incrementally over time, enabling quicker action to implement change without waiting on one big report to get going. Staff are looking forward to starting this project. So our next steps are going to be to develop a project plan, including a broad public consultation plan, to create a framework for the project, including principles and objectives, and to launch some early action projects. Next slide, please. Moving on to the other elements of the work plan for the second management period. Again, I'll go over these quick. Basically, it's broken down into 6 categories that are listed here on the slide. And so some other things. For tree maintenance, staff will be focused on developing and piloting a structural pruning program. Asset management includes a few key projects, including the ongoing tree and forest inventory work, the canopy cover reassessment, which is now underway and will provide an analysis of our canopy cover change in Ottawa over the last 5 years. The finalization of a first green space and urban forest services asset management plan for Ottawa with the asset management team, and a wildland fire hazard mapping project. So this one's a provincial requirement, and it will involve the mapping of wildland fire hazards in Ottawa, which will guide the management of the city's forested lands moving forward. The second management period will also include an urban and an urban forest outreach and engagement strategy, which will be developed and implemented. And consultation on this is already underway this month. We will do continued integration work, and our focus will shift to the new zoning bylaw, to city infrastructure projects, and the climate resiliency strategy. And finally, tree protection will continue through ongoing implementation, enforcement, and monitoring of the tree bylaw. So of course, the report goes into details on these, and document 3 of the report is a table summarizing the full work plan. Next slide, please. So Ottawa has a solid plan in place through the UFMP. The biggest lesson learned in the first management period is that there's a need to build capacity and resiliency within the city's forestry teams to deliver existing programs and services, to respond to the higher level of extreme weather events, and to support the implementation of the UFMP. This capacity building has recently started in planning. A temporary forester position was created with funding from the new climate change budget allocation to support UFMP implementation. And a planning forester position was approved through the Bill 109 resourcing report to support ongoing tree integration into planning approvals. For Public Works, as a starting point, the staff report before you today recommends the immediate creation of 2 new full-time positions by leveraging existing funds to create capacity within the forestry team to advance the important work under the UFMP. Without additional capacity, the implementation of the work plan for the second management period will have to be scoped down, and the UFMP will proceed overall at a slower rate. Next slide, please. So I've put the 3 staff recommendations on this slide up here. We're very proud of the work that's been accomplished in the first management period, despite many challenges, most of which all of us have never had to contend with before. It's an impressive amount of work for our small but mighty team. To wrap up, I'd like to say a huge thank you to our colleagues in planning and public works that have been involved in all this hard work through the first management period. We're excited to move forward with the work plan for the second management period to build on the foundation that's been set and to shift our attention to new and important work areas. Thanks so much for your time today, and we're happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you for all your work on this. We have 7 speakers registered for this item. So we're going to get to them after we introduce Councillor's motion. So Councillor Carr, if you're ready, if you could just introduce your motion before we receive the delegations.
Thank you very much, Chair. Whereas the Urban Forest Management Plan is meant to provide a clear and comprehensive plan to improve urban forest management and urban forest resiliency, and whereas the derecho in May 2022 and the ice storm in April 2023 severely impacted the urban tree canopy and delayed portions of phase 1 of the Urban Forest Management Plan, and whereas extreme weather events affecting the urban tree canopy are becoming more frequent with climate change, and whereas increased development citywide has resulted in the loss of trees, and whereas numerous councillors committed to improving the city's tree canopy, and whereas Mayor Mark Sutcliffe's Community Tree Planting Challenge has a goal to increase tree planting to align with the council-approved objective of 40% canopy cover, therefore be it resolved that staff report back to committee with a fully costed version of the work plan presented in the Urban Forest Master Plan file update, and include the anticipated FD requirement to carry out the work plan and outline work plan scenarios and timelines based on resource availability.
Okay, thank you for that, Vice Chair Carr. Are there other motions councillors might have that they wish to introduce now? Okay, so we'll go to speakers. The first up is Leslie Cole. Leslie, I'll invite you up here and you've got 5 minutes. Nice to see you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and councillors. My name is Leslie Cole. Should I put this up a bit more? Sorry. I'm a member of the Glebe Community Association Environment Group, and we have been working with the city in the Trees for Trust plan, canvassing door to door, encouraging people to plant trees. And I wanted to speak to the Urban Forest Management Plan update to commend staff for doing, creating the bylaw that that protects trees of a certain size, and creating a baseline tree canopy and tree inventory. We would like to see that in the next year, the bylaw for tree protection will be better monitored and enforced, having lost large numbers of trees with the construction of a parking garage for the hospital and also the Taywin lands. That's a concern that perhaps the fines are not actually being enforced for tree loss. We support the idea of additional staff for the next 4 years because there is a huge amount of work to do. As you all agree, especially as members of the Environment Committee, this tree canopy aim that we have to move from 31 to 40% is extremely important, not only for capturing carbon, but for reducing storm runoff, improving air quality, and providing cooling, free cooling for residential areas. In the years going back to 2016, our group has urged a policy of automatic replanting of trees. Under the existing program, Trees for Trust, homeowners have to request a tree, and many people don't even know they can request a tree. And in many places in the inner city, where you have multiple units side by side or 3 in a house or apartment buildings, the owner there is not the person that we find when we canvass door to door. So we don't have a way to encourage them to put a tree when you know there's no tree in the front. I understand Montreal has had a program for a number of years to replace the trees that were lost to the ash borer automatically. So they go and they plant on any city boulevard area where a tree has been lost to reduce the to replace the shade and cooling that is provided by that. We agree entirely with the idea of focusing on heat islands as an area to plant trees, and the idea of equity and socioeconomic areas. And perhaps there could be the kind of education in those areas that we've been doing as volunteers in our neighborhood to tell people they can have trees planted. Hoping that's part of your campaign. One of the things I've just noticed that this year we were perhaps so successful that by the beginning of June, when someone phoned to ask for a tree, they said, sorry, we're full for the year. There are no more trees available. So I would agree that you need more staff and more funding to be able to fulfill the needs that people are seeing. I agree with your perception that trees are widely seen across all neighborhoods as an important resource in our city, that there's a high awareness of the value. As the summers get hotter and hotter, the shade on the streets and over houses is extremely important. So I would just conclude by saying that the Glebe Community Association has passed a motion of sending a letter to the mayor and councillors with a motion to urge you to adopt a proactive planting strategy with Ottawa staff automatically planting trees on city-owned frontages of private properties to achieve the 40% tree canopy coverage necessary to mitigate the impacts of climate change that we're seeing in our Ottawa neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that delegation. That was an excellent delegation. Appreciate you communicating as well the GCA's motions on this, which we've received. Any questions for the delegate? Oh, go ahead, Councillor Buck.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for your delegation. Good morning to you. Right now, if I were to lose a tree on the city's right-of-way lands on my front yard, for example, the onus is on me to call the Trees and Trust program to get that tree replaced. And I do not accept that everyone knows that's the case, but I also don't accept the fact that the onus should be on the resident to make that call whether or not a tree should be replaced or not. It should be automatic. Does the association share that view?
Yes, absolutely. That's why we're suggesting this proactive thing. We found going door to door that many people have no idea that they can request a tree and that the city will provide it free. So that's exactly why we're asking that you allow the city staff to do it proactively and not wait for the request.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington. Thank you so much for being here. Next on our list is Angela Keller-Herzog, the Executive Director of Cafes. Angela.
Good morning, everybody. So this is my first time back here in person. It seems there's less people than there used to be. So I'm Angela Keller-Herzog. I'm the Executive Director of Cafes, Ottawa's local environmental leaders network. And next slide, please. And we span the rural, suburban, and inner urban communities with both individual and organizational members in the network. Next slide, please. There we are. So I've got 4 main points on this update to the urban forest management. The urban canopy and trees are very, very dear to our members, and it's probably the premier item that people will come out for comment on. So it's a very, very important issue, I think, for all parts of the community. Next slide, please. Looking at the update that we've been presented with, we would strongly support the need for more resources. In terms of staff, the FTE request, yes, but we think there's also a gap in terms of services and material resources. In the past, when we've been in touch with Forest Services saying, well, how is the budget looking? We've been told that there's a balance to be had in terms of staff and the material resources to plant or maintain trees. So if there is a push to enhance the urban canopy, where are those material resources? We are actually very worried because we see this update as a significant scaling back in ambition for our urban forest. And I don't know how carefully the members of this committee have had a chance to compare the 200+ page of the urban forest management plan in this update, but we are seeing that there are missed deliverables from this approach. There's things being dropped. And we think that in terms of the adaptive management approach, this is not being really fully carried out. There's some lessons that we could learn from the first period, which would actually require a bolstering of resources. And we are very concerned by this drop in ambition. Next slide, please. In terms of data and management, we're also seeing an alarming absence in terms of data. In terms of public requests for information, we're often told there's no capacity in the staff to provide us with data. The official plan calls for an enhancement of the urban canopy and no net loss for the rural forests, but there's no data on the trees that we're losing. So how can we be possibly tracking? There is a public perception by many of our members in our network that we are losing the canopy, but we don't have the data. And I don't believe that this committee or the city council has the data and the evidence to know whether we are growing or whether we're losing canopy. So we don't even know if the direction of travel is correct, and even less so any kind of detailed data. We also believe that getting data on the assessment of the urban canopy every 5 years is not adequate for councillors on a term of council to influence what is happening in terms of public investment in canopy. Next slide, please. Is there a timer? I'm not sure. If it could be displayed, that would be good. Collaboration with the community. We have many members of the community who are ready to volunteer. We've been very happy that we have got support from Forestry Services in terms of the Trees and Trust cards. We have volunteers going out trying to inform residents that the Trees and Trust program even exists. But in general, we're seeing that there's a deep prioritization of public engagement and consultation when it comes to urban canopy. And you can see that too in terms of which of the recommendations for management period 1 have been fulfilled. So the consultation engagement strategy is not in place. The external stakeholder working group is not in place. Next slide, please. So lastly, we very much appreciate that there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. And in terms of working horizontally, that this is time consuming and invisible to the public in many cases. But when we look at the big picture drivers connecting to the urban forest management, it's pretty much invisible. So in terms of the climate master plan and nature-based solutions, we have seen zero action on that. In terms of the infrastructure master plan, we recently started to have the fulsome presentation.
To wrap up.
Wrap up. Okay, sorry, I can't see the time. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so on these big pieces, we're not seeing the integration. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. So just to give an example for how we can bring together stormwater management and urban forest, there is a lot of international practice and technical guideline. Stormwater management costs everybody a lot. This is like $1 billion envelope. So it seems to us that we should be doing a better job of not stovepiping, but making those connections, how we can invest in like tree trenches to get better stormwater catchment. This is just one example of integration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great presentation. Councillor Hill, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much. I know you were a bit rushed at the end, so I just wanted to offer the opportunity if there was anything in your second last slide there that you wanted to highlight more so, just to give you a bit more opportunity to speak to that.
Yes, let me see the second last slide. I have a printout here. Yeah, as you know, we have many big pieces that are moving through the agenda of this term of council, and not least the implementation pieces for the official plan. And a lot of that are huge chunks of work, right? So I think having urban forest management capacity where the update basically says we really only have capacity for one big piece. So it almost seems like a work plan for one person, right? Because this is a 4-year work plan. So if we're saying we can only do the strategy, the tree planting strategy, and that itself will not be one piece that's coming to council, how are we having the capacity to connect the urban forest, how the technical guidelines to integrate, for example, with like stormwater management, like I was saying? How can we start integrating with the climate action plan? In terms of the budget, we are seeing that the forest budget is going up by about 3% in the last budget, which is not even keeping up with inflation. So how is this going to result in no net loss or enhancement of the urban canopy? It just seems that it's very under-resourced. But it also seems in terms of the ambition and integrating with the other pieces, which could be part of cost effectiveness, that we're not seeing this in this update.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Hill. Councillor Carr, or Vice Chair Carr.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your delegation. I absolutely agree with you with respect to the under-resourcing, which is why I put the motion together today. And in fact, I did cross-reference the original urban forest management plan with the second piece, and I noticed that there was a whole bunch of items that were originally supposed to take place in phase 2. For example, the pest and disease management strategy which had fallen off, which is why I put that motion together today to try and have a better understanding. I don't think the 2 additional resources that are being requested are going to be able to give these staff the capacity they need to meet the ambitious goals. And I'm very sympathetic to the situation that they're in. I believe we have unanimous support for 40% canopy cover around this table. And we certainly have been dealing with issues in the past little while where we did not have unanimous support around this table. So it's a huge priority for me to get that information to understand exactly how many resources are needed in order to get this underway. There's a lot of work to be done, but I just wanted to thank you for that.
Yeah, I think it would be useful for this committee to be informed in terms of what deliverables are being dropped in this update. I think that, again, this is not clear. And I think that this drop in ambition and really saying that we are having a major downward revision in the urban forest management plan. Hence, we're going to have less canopy, presumably, less trees, less healthy canopy, that better information is needed. And right now, the update doesn't really present that information.
Okay, thank you for that, Vice Chair. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much, Angela, and I really appreciate your delegation. I think it complements what we're doing. I mean, you have to point out where we can do better, and I appreciate that. I've seen examples in my own ward and the befores and afters, and we're starting of the tree bylaw, for example, and it's very helpful. I was interested in what you were talking about with the, if I got it right, with stormwater and for trees, was it tree ditches or tree, is that what it was? Trenches, sorry. I'd like to see more trees, but the thing that we keep coming across is utilities are problematic because they're everywhere. That seems to be the response I get when I talk about, right of way, et cetera, to get more trees. But I'd like to hear more about the tree trenches in terms of stormwater management, especially in areas where we have nothing but ditches. It's not piped at all, which is good. But where is that? I haven't done the research on that, but where is that being done?
You can just turn your mic on there, Ms. Calderazar.
Okay, so I'm going to try to answer your question, Councillor Kavanaugh, but I'm an economist. I'm not an engineer. So this may need to be corrected and supplemented later by city engineering staff. And I know that Martha has a lot of knowledge. So the general scenario is that underneath the sidewalk is supposed to be where the utility, like a joint utility trench is supposed to be. And in future, if we want to go to district energy systems and things like that, the idea would be for that infrastructure to be located under the sidewalk. And then beside it, the right of way would have the individual access to buildings in terms of the utilities. And that's when you have your locate, you get the little yellow flags and things like that. So I think to say that the utilities are everywhere, that's not plan A. Right? I mean, obviously, sometimes legacy utilities can be in odd places, but what I've described, I think, is the intended plan. So then in terms of the utilization of the right of way, if you look at the incentive program for rain gardens that we have in some parts of town, right, where there is landscaping where what you do is you build, like you dig a soaking pit so that there is more area for stormwater to flow into and then slowly seep away. So if you use that kind of soaking pit and you use structural soil and you dig like 3 trenches, then you can have a win-win scenario where you have 3 pits where the water can infiltrate and you can absorb the water rather than it flowing into the municipal infrastructure. And a lot of the compacted right of way, it technically is permeable, but practically speaking, often you get pretty immediate runaway, especially if there's heavy clay. So there could be a huge win-win if we started combining the idea of digging tree pits and then also planting canopy trees in those same ways. And right now, the trees in trust in the right of way, for example, like they would just dig a very small hole for that tree. They wouldn't be digging a larger cavity, and they wouldn't be filling it with gravel or structural soil.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanaugh. Really appreciate your delegation, and it's important, I think, that we push in the next phase of this strategy. A lot of things that you're talking about here, particularly with residents helping and the volunteers that are ready and able and willing to, as well as that data on the flyovers, how we receive that data and how often. And because we will get that data, obviously, and we've seen studies from Carleton, we're losing our tree canopy, but we need more data. And so just appreciate this push, and I look forward to seeing more progress on this as we move to the next phases of this overall management plan. So thanks for being here to delegate on this. Our next delegation is Leslie Baird.
Good morning. My name is Leslie Baird, and this is Kringen Hanine. And we represent an environment action group looking into Ottawa's urban forest management plan and its tree protection bylaw of 2021. Members of our group are drawn from the Canadian Federation of University Women, Cafes, Ecology Ottawa, CPAWS Ottawa Valley, Green Space Alliances of Canada's capital, and others. We are concerned that weaknesses in these two documents, supposedly protecting our forest, have caused Ottawa to lose trees faster than the new trees could be planted. The city's excellent no net loss of trees policy, because of exemptions in the tree protection bylaw, fails to protect the canopy in the suburban and the peri-urban areas. These weaknesses should be identified and rectified as soon as possible. Ottawa is the capital of Canada and should be a leader in its green policy. The tree protection bylaw states on page 12, a distinctive urban tree has a breast height diameter, DBH, of 30 centimeters or more, and a distinctive suburban tree has a DBH of 50 centimeters or more. These trees require a permit to be destroyed, and there are compensation requirements. On private property lands greater than 1 hectare, including woodland areas on either side of the new urban boundary, the bylaw states that a permit is required to destroy trees over 10 centimeters in diameter. There is an exemption for farmland, which is extremely vague and requires provincial clarification of the normal, and I quote, normal farm activity, unquote, aspect of this law. Some weaknesses that we have found in the tree protection bylaw. Number one, definitions are vague and need to be clarified to be effective, especially defective trees, defective tree permit, compensation value, and farming business. Number two, education of the staff needs to include clear guidelines for easily implemented decisions without interpretation and without consultation. Number three, the practice of clear cutting on lands for development in suburban areas needs to be replaced so that large trees are included as part of the development plan. We suggest the following corrections. Number one, clearly state the federal and provincial definitions of a farm and quote, normal farm activity, unquote, in the city's protection bylaw. It should not be necessary to consult the Ontario Department of Agriculture website or the Federal Income Tax Act to find these definitions. Number two, the expansion of farmland by cutting trees should require a permit with a time limit of no more than 3 years in which to develop the agricultural use, and a definition of what, quote, the agricultural use means should be included. There should be a requirement to replant a sustained mixed forest if agriculture is not established. Violations of this are unacceptable. Number three, measurable definitions and guidelines are needed for forests, woodlands, and woodlots to properly assess and manage the general expectation for private trees. Section 8.2 states, and I quote, a tree permit or a distinctive tree permit is not required in the following circumstances: the injury or destruction of a normal farm practice carried out as part of agricultural operation by an agricultural business. Agriculture should not be confused with lumbering. In an area where the city is trying to protect existing forests, the cutting of 25,000 trees by a development company is a logging practice. Number four, the section extending protection to the peri-urban area was promised and needs to be included in the tree protection bylaw as soon as possible. We call on the City of Ottawa to amend the tree protection bylaw addressing issues of concern raised in this presentation. We call on the City of Ottawa to provide Ottawa staff with the additional education and training on this new bylaw so that they can better administer and assure compliance. We call on the City of Ottawa to change the agricultural exemption to require a permit to remove trees, stating the number and size, and the actual farming must take place within 3 years. We all know what tragically happened at the Taggart Algonquins of Ontario parcel. And finally, to act on the urban forest management plan to promise, as it promises, and I quote, to monitor and make required process changes or bylaw amendments to the tree protection bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your delegation. Vice Chair Carr has a question.
Yeah, sorry, thank you for your presentation. I just have a clarification. At the opening, you said that the reason for, you alluded to the fact that it was because of, you felt that it was because of exemptions that we were unable to meet the targets. Did I understand that correctly?
It's because of exemptions that trees are being cut, and the exemptions, the description is very general, which is why the Taggart and Algonquins of Ontario were able to come back to city staff and say, we can use the agricultural exemption, and that is defined by the province and by income tax as to what is a farm. And so it makes it all very hard to implement, and it allows a loophole that now is holding things up until the response comes back from the Ontario government of whether this is really a violation.
Okay, thanks. I'll just share my perspective as a councillor for Alta Vista Ward 18. I don't think that there's been any impact to the exemptions in my ward. We've been absolutely devastated by disease. Emerald ash borer took out so many trees. Weather events, the trees in my neighborhood are, the neighborhood was farmland when it was taken over in 1950s. We've lost hundreds and hundreds of trees from windstorms and derecho. And prior to the implementation of the tree protection bylaw, the construction that was taking place largely from about 2000 to 2015 before it came into place. So it's really just, for me, it's those factors. And I just wanted to comment that I don't see the impact of the exemptions in my neighborhood. And as a inner urban, outer urban neighborhood, to be only at 28% tree canopy in an area where I have so many parks. I just wanted to comment that there, you know, from my perspective, there's lots of other factors, but thank you very much for your delegation.
And the area that is urban where I live, I appreciate all the things that you are saying. Also, within the plan, it deals a lot with the urban, not so much with the suburban and the peri-urban. And it's in those areas that there is a great deal of clear cutting for subdivisions, and on private land, a forest was cut down.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Kavanaugh has a question.
Thank you very much, Leslie and Kringen, for coming out today. I appreciate your passion for this issue. In terms of Taywin, one of the things that we discovered was that there really isn't a time where a time limit on when agriculture can start. When you're saying you're going to use the land for agriculture, you can cut down the trees and then it's not used for agriculture. It's it just left that way. Are you seeing this as a loophole? I think certainly a lot of people are. Yeah, that's a concern we have. It's something that obviously we didn't discover until this happened. Yeah, it may not fit into exactly what we're doing right now, but I think there's something that we have to look at in the future, since it doesn't come up that often that usually we're trying to preserve agricultural land, but in this case, it's the forest that we're trying to protect, and it's that switch. So, but if you just cut it down and just say it's agricultural land, but there's no time limit on when you should be starting your agricultural practices to show that this was sincere. Is that how you read it?
And
You can just switch on your mic there in response. Thank you.
In the city of Ottawa, trees have been cut overnight by developers going back to 2010, when the last old growth forest was removed overnight in the Canada area. 2014, 2017 also saw those tactics. And talking to other environmental groups, it seems developers will take action ahead of time in order to remove the environment, damage the environment, so there can be no environmental assessment, because there is no environment to be assessed. So that the whole incident seems very, very worrisome. And there suburban areas where all of the development is going on at the moment, and the peri-urban is where it's going to happen in the future. And when I went out to see the site that had been cut, I was amazed at how huge it was, and that the majority of trees, there were still two stacks there waiting to be taken away, were larger than our definition of distinctive trees. So my thought was that the distinctive tree qualification was, far more extensive in the 25,000 trees that were cut than we realized. And so if the definition is not implied and not carried out, then there is no protection for this kind of canopy that we're depending on for our future.
Thanks very much. So Councillor Kavanaugh, I have Councillor Devine to ask a question as well. Okay, and we'll just stay with the UFMP report, folks. So Councillor Devine on the UFMP report, question for you.
Well, then it wasn't a question on the UFMB. I just wanted to briefly thank the delegate for raising the issue. It's hard to look at our restoration goals and not take into account all impacts of our tree canopy, whether it be natural disasters or large tree cutting operations. And I just wanted to reassure you that there still are, councillors are still looking into and concerned about, tree clearing as it may have happened in the areas near Taywin. And it certainly does have an impact on our goals. And so we will be able to continue talking about this offline. Thank you very much for your delegation.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Devine. And just on the points that you raised, I will raise some with staff around on the UFMP around the 30 versus 50 centimeter diameter at base height. Of course, there was a motion last term on that, and I know there's been work done, so I'll want to hear an update here today on what's happening with that and how fast that can occur, as well as the next committee report and the ambition that you've talked about here in terms of what comes next for this plan. So appreciate you being here. Elise McCann from Enviro Center is next up with us. Elise.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is on. Okay. Hi. Thank you, Chair and councillors, for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you to staff for providing the update. My name is Elise McCann. I'm the Director of Business Development at Enviro Center, and I'm joined by my colleague, Jennifer Stelzer. So some of you may know our organization. The next slide, please. So Enviro Center is an environmental nonprofit, and since 1999, we've been providing a variety of programs and services in the region designed to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We're best known for working in 4 key areas: green homes, green business, green transportation, and our green future. And in addition to some of the projects that you might know us for that we've listed on the slide, we've also been working more and more in green infrastructure projects. For example, the Rain Ready Ottawa program and depave work, where we've been helping to depave hardscape and planting gardens, as well as a pilot project that we ran with the Ottawa Carleton District School Board to put in nature nooks at a number of schools across the region. Recently, we've acquired funding to run a pilot program in Ottawa with Ottawa Community Housing, where we're planting 3 mini forests and working with the communities there, as well as doing a full greening of York Street Public School, which is a school in one of our lowest income areas in the region. Next slide, please. So we were happy to read the update and do find that the adaptive management approach did provide us with an opportunity to understand what had been achieved, what hadn't, and what we could look forward to in the future. We acknowledge that the last few years have presented a number of challenges for city staff and the impacts of extreme climate or storms and climate change events on our city, and the impact that this has on staff and how that had affected priorities. And we appreciated just reading about those, understanding those, and then also acknowledging the need that we do need to make our cities more resilient, which includes trees and looking at the urban canopy. So next slide, please. A few things that stood out for us. We appreciated the data collection that was done and understanding the urban canopy and allowing that to be a baseline and points of measurement going forward so that we can have clarity on the assessment tools that are used to see the impacts of the work that the city's doing as well as others in the region. And the 30 criteria and indicators for sustainable urban forest management are important for those monitoring and maintenance objectives and evaluation going forward. The increased integration into city departments and that tree culture beyond the tree team, I think, is really important. And while maybe it isn't perfect, I thought that seeing that other departments were taking up the challenge and taking action in those areas was really important. And seeing that articulated, I saw that as a very positive thing. We support the need for increasing the team, the staffing needs, and recognize that in order to move this forward, especially the tree planting strategy and action items that will come with that are key to ensure that there's staffing capacity to collaborate internally as well as externally with community organizations and partners. Tree equity is something that we hold very dear to our heart in the work that we do, both on addressing energy poverty through our energy efficiency programs, but also in this case, in ensuring that the most vulnerable areas of our city are prioritized for tree planting projects. And we saw that the city is using socioeconomic factors, overlaying that with existing tree canopy, and that we hope that that will continue to inform what projects are prioritized in the future, and that an equity lens be used to prioritize this work. And then the piece I also wanted to comment around leveraging partnerships and and the community effort happening across the city, both to potentially collaborate on funding opportunities, but also on the important work, because as was noted, this cannot be done alone. This requires work from everybody to help the city achieve this target of 40% tree canopy, including businesses, private landowners, the city, the regional efforts. So we hope that we can collectively learn about the best practices that are happening elsewhere across the country and beyond, examples of collaboration, and that we can collectively move forward to support this goal. So we recognize the complexities of the work and the update being presented. We hope that you accept and support this update, in particular the capacity, the staffing capacity required to move from strategy to action. And I want to thank you again for the update, and Chair and councillors for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you so much for your delegation and for all the work that Enviro Center does on a number of topics within the city. Councillor Kavanaugh has a question for you.
Thank you very much to both of you. What I love is that I get to see you out in the community, and that's where it's really important, is that grassroots education and maybe tree roots education. We'll call it that. But I appreciate it because it's a partnership. And I also just wanted to thank you for your partnership with Ottawa Community Housing. Not all communities are able to reach out, and it's that partnership and education and just moving forward to making communities better really helps. So there are communities that are motivated to improve their communities, but those that are more vulnerable have other preoccupations, and I appreciate that work that you're doing. So I just wanted to let you know that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I can just add one comment, as well as the focus of Ottawa Community Housing is to ensure that they have, housing is their top priority, and those collaborations with partners make a big difference for advancing these other types of projects and work that has so many benefits for their residents. So thank you for commenting on that.
Thank you very much for your delegation. Up next is William Van Geest, Program Coordinator with Ecology Ottawa. I believe William's online.
Thank you, Chair. Are you able to hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Wonderful, thanks. I can get started.
You can go ahead and you've got 5 minutes.
Great, thank you. So I am addressing you on behalf of Ecology Ottawa. We are pleased to see an update on the Urban Forest Management Plan. We were closely involved in consultations for this plan, and we think the end result was good. We also want to acknowledge how critical trees are for our city, whether sequestering carbon, filtering the air, providing habitat, mitigating the heat island, urban heat island effect, soaking up water, providing shade, and beautifying our city, of course. In short, we do well to implement this plan and to do so as expeditiously as possible. This brings me to our main objection that this update raises, namely that the UFMP's implementation fails to reflect the urgency of the present crisis. City Council declared a climate emergency in 2019, and rightly so. The dangerously poor air quality we experienced just a couple of weeks ago and the wildfires that caused it are only the most recent reminders of this emergency. The update before us lists several challenges, many centering around lack of resources. For example, the update reports that, I'm quoting here, current resources provide capacity to manage one large UFMP project at a time. And that, again quoting, staffing capacity did not match the work plan in the first management period. And there were, of course, delays. For example, the update itself was delayed by a year. At the same time, so far in 2023, we've seen records broken in global air temperature, ocean surface temperatures, Arctic ice melting, and carbon dioxide levels. And of course, we're breaking records every year, but we're breaking them more this year than other years. So can we really afford to take the UFMP projects one at a time? Among the reasons cited for this delay are extreme weather events, because of which, I'm quoting here, many staff in forestry paused their regular work for months. Yet we've known for some time that climate change will bring extreme weather events. In our opinion, the city should not treat such events as an exception, but as a reality. This reality should be reflected structurally. Resources must be allocated for such events so that dealing with them won't delay implementing the UFMP. Indeed, acknowledging extreme weather as a reality will become all the more necessary as such events increase in frequency and intensity. We're of course pleased to see the request for additional staff members, but will 2 truly suffice? Moreover, the proposal to fund these is a reallocation from materials and services, not new funding. What materials and services will forestry forego for these hires? We urge you to ensure that the plan is properly resourced with capacity built in for these extreme weather events and disruptions. We're also concerned about the scoping down, that's the words of the plan, in the work plan for the second management period. 2 recommendations subject to this scoping down are the tree planting strategy and the tree planting guidelines. Yet the UFMP calls for a 30% increase in the urban canopy. Again, granted that it's at 31% and we're going for 40%. So if we're to achieve the 40% target, we need to plant trees thoughtfully. We also noticed a scoping down of the urban forest inventory collection and maintenance and the integration into the city's asset management program. Both of these initiatives are critical to protecting the trees we already had. Why are they being scoped down? And similarly for the slower implementation, that's the words of the update, of the tree protection bylaw. What justifies this delay? Let me also mention that investments in trees return substantial rewards, anywhere from 2 to 12 times the initial investment, according to a 2014 study. And as an aside, it's a bit shocking to me that the only entry under the section economic implications is an NA, not applicable. On the topic of our canopy targets, we're also wondering about the neighborhood lens that this update promises. What are the mechanisms of this lens? How will neighborhoods be defined? Will this fulfill the target of 40% cover per neighborhood that Ecology Ottawa and many other groups, including the 4,000 people who signed our tree petition, have been urging? I'd also like to address biodiversity. This update mentions biodiversity but 1 time and native species in only 1 location. However, trees are essential for supporting biodiversity. I'll just point out also how this very committee voted unanimously in April to sign the Montreal Pledge on Biodiversity. Is the UFMP responding adequately to the present biodiversity crisis? Finally, I just want to acknowledge a couple particularly welcome components of the plan. Very briefly, the shift in the city's approach to tree planting from reactive to proactive, the private land tree planting program, and the incentives for tree preservation. These, we feel, better reflect the urgency of the present crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your delegation. I'll see if anyone has any questions at committee. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up. I wanted to thank you for coming out and hope you stay tuned for the questions that'll come to staff and obviously the next iterations of this plan. So appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Astrid Nielsen, you are up next. We have 2 more delegates, Astrid Nielsen and then Paul Johannes. Good morning. And if you could just click on your microphone there. Thank you. And you've got 5 minutes too. Yes.
That's better.
Thanks for being here. You've got 5 minutes.
Good morning. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak today in support of the motion to approve the work plan for the second management period of the Urban Forest Management Plan and for the extra FTEs to support this work. I'm a forestry consultant, and a large portion of the work that I do is the preparation of tree reports for infill development. I also worked at the City of Ottawa for 7 years in various forestry positions. Staff have worked really hard over the last 5 years to implement regulations and policies around better protecting our trees, especially through the development process. The results have been effective when it comes up to educating all players, as Martha had mentioned, particularly city staff, on the importance of trees have in our communities. But they've had less of an impact in contributing towards the 40% canopy cover targets. There are many reasons for this, and in my experience, in summary, it is really difficult to retain trees effectively during development projects, especially when the density is being increased on site. I completed an analysis of 58 trees on sites 1 to 3 years post infill development, and 45% were not retained successfully. And this is most likely to increase as we continue to monitor them over the next few years. Not surprisingly, those sites where density increased saw the greatest impact of tree canopy. As these tree policies have strengthened, it has become more expensive for the city to retain trees. And in my opinion, we get a much better bang for our buck by investing more in tree planting, care, and maintenance. As staff work towards a proactive management model, I would like to urge council members to be thoughtful and selective when asking for their support and public reaction to tree removal in their wards. If we are to reach our intensification targets, trees will be lost as a result. There are good measures in place that have been put in place over the last 5 years to protect trees where possible, and we need to focus on how to compensate for those losses in a fair and equitable way. Some mature, wealthier neighborhoods may lose some canopy over the short term, but with proper planning, some of those losses could be offset through aggressive tree planting initiatives in those neighborhoods with lower tree canopy cover, where trees may not be the top priority for residents. I also urge staff to avoid using the number of permits issued or denied to be a measure on the effectiveness of tree bylaws. So many outside factors impact these numbers, and they don't reflect the good work that is being done. Staff are on the right path by using remote sensing tools to assess canopy cover over time, and it's how foresters have been monitoring our forests for almost a century across Canada. Mobilizing communities that are seeking a better connection to nature, which has increased significantly during COVID and climate change, is one of the best investments the city can make at improving forest health. Although overall canopy is important, forest health is equally so. We don't want our future forests to be dominated by invasive species, which are really common in the urban area. And I'm glad to see that through this management shift, we'll be focusing more on community outreach and engagement, and I encourage council to continue supporting these initiatives. Finally, the importance of good tree maintenance cannot be overstated. At each major storm event, I tour the worst hit areas, and a common theme among my anecdotal observations is that those trees that were not well maintained fared the worst. It is critical that we maintain those trees that we have to make our forests more resilient to climate change. The same is true for proactive management of invasive pests and diseases, an increasing threat to urban forests. Only last week, the first case of oak wilt was confirmed in Niagara, well, the first case in Canada, and it will only be a matter of time before it hits Ottawa. It could kill oak trees within a year of infection, a lot shorter time frame in some extreme cases. And studies have shown that municipalities that invest in prevention of spread can better control and reduce the impact and cost than the invasive species have on their forests. And as invasive species and climate change continue to devastate our forests, I encourage council to continue supporting increase of resources over the next several years or into the future. And finally, in my experience from teaching an urban forestry course at U of T, where we tour different municipalities across Ontario, I can confidently say that Ottawa is a leader in urban forest management, and others look to us for our advanced policies and strong leadership. I'm pleased to see that our city is ready to take the next stages of the urban forest management plan from a reactive to a more proactive approach, and I look forward to being part of this exciting initiative as our urban forest continues to grow and provide the important benefits that we all need to survive in this warming climate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that delegation. I'm not seeing hands up, but I do have just a question for you around just given your extensive experience and knowledge on this topic. I'm wondering how you see getting volunteers involved to work with the city. I just know in my community, I have people counting trees, identifying those trees, and monitoring them all through my community, and they're doing it on their own, just with their free time because they care so much. I know that this will exist across the city and people's care. So how can the city leverage that potential volunteer capacity to work on our tree canopy? What ideas might you have for involving those people that really want to be involved in this and bring them in?
Yeah, great question. And I think about this all the time because I really believe that this is, the grassroots is what's going to make a change. And I get really excited when I see, the neighborhoods. I think that's probably the one that you might be referring to, the neighborhoods program. That's one of the programs out there.
There's neighborhoods. There's also the Old Ottawa South Tree Team. Glebe Community Association started doing counts as well. So.
Yeah. So back to your question though, so my local community, I'm close to Hampton Park, and I've worked with one of the key organizers that runs a lot of initiatives there. And she is frustrated sometimes at the lack of support from the city, basically at a resource level. And she's indicated to me that what would really help for a forest like that is just some guidelines on explaining to them on what to do next. Like maybe provide some sort of a template for communities to be able to develop forest management plans for their local areas. And if available, a forester or someone with that similar expertise to help provide that guidance. So that is one thing that's always sort of stuck out with me. That would be.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And obviously, kind of resource capacity and the ambition on this is going to have to be amped up in the next little while. So really appreciate that. Vice Chair Carr.
Yeah, thanks. I just had a follow-up question with respect to volunteer management. I completely agree that it would be lovely to incorporate volunteer efforts, and it's something that I previously advocated for in a past life. The challenges that I've experienced in my own community are competing community groups who want to establish consent to enter agreements and have their own ideas about what should be planted, how it should be planted, what neighborhoods. And what I found often is that I have a very diverse ward. It includes areas such as Alta Vista near the hospital, but it also includes Herringate, is that it's become an equity issue. So I've got the most active volunteer groups continually planting in the same areas, advocating, competing, and 90% of my ward, not 90%, that's not true, but I've got a lot of heat islands in the other areas. And I'm wondering if you could speak to your experience in making sure that that hasn't been the case in your ward, in your advocacy.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, so I wouldn't be able to speak to that specific issue, but I think the more information we have on tree distribution, urban canopy distribution, will maybe help identify those areas that need it the most. And I think that's from what I've heard, that is part of what's going to be happening in the future.
Yeah, that was something that I was really pleased to see. And it's been a huge challenge, in my community, just with respect to not necessarily tree management, but invasive plant management. I've got my wealthiest communities that got insurance agreements, got everything in place, and the rest of my community is not experiencing it. So I'm always conscious of equity issues. But thank you very much for your presentation today.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much for being here. Next up is Paul Johannes with the Green Space Alliance, Canada's capital.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me this morning. So I'll be speaking on behalf of the Green Space Alliance today. So we welcome this first report on the status of the UFMP at the end of its first four-year planning period. And we have comments on the report itself in terms of content and substance. And maybe there's sort of, lessons learned or things that we might want to take into account for the report for period 2, period 3, period 4 going forward. So take my comments in that context. So first, a report such as this one, which is focused really on process and the internal functioning of the plan, while that's necessary, it needs to be accompanied by an outwardly focused report that talks about the state of the urban forest itself. That should be a companion piece. It shouldn't just be, here's operations. What's the outcome? What's the actual situation out there? Those things should be coming together to committee, we believe. And at this time, I know the information is incomplete, and it'd be difficult to provide that kind of report, but somehow the report should take into account, take note of, and give account of major external events that have put pressure on the urban forest. We've heard about the tornadoes, the derecho, the ice storm, but we've heard them as reasons for not being able to do the work. We haven't heard of them in terms of what damage was actually done. Even if we don't know exactly, we have ideas of orders of magnitude. That kind of thing should be included in a report like this, we believe. The ongoing development pressure is also there, and that kind of impact on canopy cover and tree inventory should be referred to in a report coming to committee like this one. should also, in terms of a major development over the planning periods, these should be reported on. And of course, the tree protection bylaw was adopted in the period, and that was reported on in terms of the bylaw was adopted and worked on. And there are as well some sort of qualitative statements made about the efficacy of the bylaw. But it would be, I think it would benefit the report to come with either concrete examples of the application of the bylaw in its various contexts, distinctive trees, large developments, and or statistical information on the actual application of the bylaw. How many distinctive trees were preserved? How many permits were granted to remove distinctive trees? How many fines were levied over the period for contravening the bylaw? Basic kind of information like this to tell us about, well, really what has been the efficacy beyond general statements. I think it would be useful to have that. So there ought to be this type of statistical digest associated with a report like this coming to committee. Again, this type of data has not been completely developed, but at least like specific examples of the operation of the bylaw under its different parts would be instructive, like specific cases. Here's a situation where here's what staff did, here's what the situation was, here's how trees were protected in this particular instance. That would be, it'd be useful. I think it'd be useful for the community, be useful for us, useful for members to get an appreciation for how the bylaw is in fact working. As well, how the bylaw failed should be reported on, and a case in point has come up already, which is the Tailwind deforestation. So a loss of this magnitude during the reporting period should not pass under silence. I mean, it should be reported on in the report, and steps taken to address the shortcomings of the bylaw should also be commented on. We know there's work going on. We know we've talked about it. It's been referenced and so on, but why isn't it in the report? I mean, there should be something in there saying, here's what we're going to do about it in the next planning period. Another major development over the planning period was the adoption of the official plan, and that is reported on with policies directly relevant to the urban forest management plan. But there was also a commitment note to develop a new urban forest and green space master plan. And this would provide the policy anchor for the UFMP. And it's critical to have that policy anchor so that the plan is not just kind of a work plan for a section of the city administration. No, it's really tied into the achievement of significant policies that would be in the urban forest and green space master plan. However, the lack of progress in this regard, because it hasn't been started, we haven't seen that plan yet, and it hasn't yet started. That should be reported on, and specific steps taken to work on that should be included in the second phase of this report. This is kind of connections to the bigger policy pieces between the UFMP and the bigger policy pieces, and the next immediately adjacent one would be the urban forest and green space master plan. It needs to be covered in the report. So we understand that external weather shocks, the pandemic, senior management, turmoil, turnover, that's had a big impact on the ability of the city to fulfill all of the
I'll ask you to wrap up, Mr. Johannes.
Yep. But given the importance of the plan and exposure to all these pressures, it would be wise, I think, to institute annual reporting to this committee on progress made and obstacles encountered, so that adjustments and so that the committee can make adjustments and keep track of progress towards the plan. We strongly support the urban forest management plan. It's key to the development of a healthy forest for Ottawa. We urge you to keep it high in your priorities and to fund it appropriately through budget and other means as necessary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your delegation. I'll see if any questions from committee. Not seeing hands up. I appreciate you being here. Thank you very much. So with that, that's the last of our delegations. We're now going to go to councillor questions and comments for staff, and we'll start with Vice Chair Carr.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I would like to thank staff for their enormous amount of work and acknowledge the extreme amount of work that was completed in the first management period with a lot of variables that were not anticipated. Unlike other files, I think I said it earlier, I think we can all agree around the table how important tree canopy cover are. I didn't sit around the council table before November, but I was involved at a community advocacy group, and the resources that are at the table today and that have undertaken their work are the same resources that have been undertaking this work for years and years and years, and have been my community contacts for many years. And I think that speaks to the fact that as things have evolved, more and more people are interested in trees. We've seen devastation with our trees due to weather events and in some cases development. We really haven't expanded the resources that are available. And I think in reviewing the report today, we can see, looking at the UFMP accomplishments and what was planned for the first period, we see exactly what happens when the staffing plan does not meet the work plan. And I'm wondering, I have a few questions for staff. In the third annex on the appendix of the report, you speak to what can be accomplished, and there's a number of items that have been, you acknowledge that it could be completed, but it would be scoped down, or that it couldn't be completed. Can you confirm whether that includes the new 2 FTEs that you're asking for, the assessment of work for that, please? I don't know how to scroll down on my sheet.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. The 2 FTEs would be, because the tree planting strategy is your feature project, so those 2 FTEs would be dedicated to helping to build capacity for, our tree planting team. So as is, it doesn't reflect those 2 FTEs. So the tree planting strategy we're anticipating would not need to be scoped down with those 2 extra FTEs.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for that. And when you looked at what could be accomplished, can you speak to the level of risk that you incorporated in the plan? And what I mean by that, over the last few years, we had the ice stream, the derecho, and the tornado in the first management period alone, along with a pandemic, which probably had an impact on some of the workforce. I'm wondering, when you costed out that or laid out what you could accomplish with the resources over the next year, can you speak about the risk that you incorporated into that plan, knowing what happened in the first management plan?
Thank you. So when we're looking at the work plan for the second management period and what could and couldn't be accomplished, we're looking at the staff involved in those projects. A few staff will touch every one of those pieces of that work plan. So for example, the tree planting strategy, it's not a one-person project. Martha's the lead on it, but it will touch many staff within the forestry services team. Myself are the lead on our tree planting teams, down to our field staff that are landscape architects that work in the field. They're the subject matter experts on those tree planting programs. So we've looked at what who would touch those projects and where the capacity needs to be built in their teams.
Thank you for that. I just have a few other questions. And it was raised today, I think, from our first delegation, that because it's been revised, what can be undertaken in the second management period, that are some items that have slipped now. And it gave the example of the, I call it the invasive species. That's not the right term, the pest and disease management strategy. Are there other pieces that have slipped that you can speak to as well, that we've had to take off the original plan, second management period of the original UFMP? Do you have that available, or?
Thank you so much, through you, Chair. Yeah, I do have our initial plan here. And you're right, there are a few that have slipped. And basically that is the adaptive management of this plan. So looking at the challenges that we faced in the first management period, assessing what we were able to complete with the staff resources that we have, and then looking at the projects that we have coming forward that we haven't completed yet, we have coming forward, and building a plan for the second management period. So our first effort was to bring the items that we hadn't completed in the first management period that has been slotted for the first management period into the second management period. And so that's where you see the tree planting strategy and the outreach and engagement stuff. Everything on this list is priority, and so that was prioritized into the first management period initially. We're bringing that now into the second because we weren't able to complete it. So a few other items we have, it's really just around the pest and disease management strategy, and then some other sort of extensions of what we're going to be doing now. So this thing around neighborhood tree planting plans. So we're building the base for that through the tree planting strategy and through our outreach and engagement. And then we'll be able to see how that can, be laid out as we move forward. But we're building the base for that now. But just to note that on the pest and disease management strategy, that doesn't mean that we're doing no work on this. We are so well integrated into national and provincial networks on forest pests and disease, and and talking with other municipalities and partnering on strategies and all that kind of stuff. So we are working on that actively all of the time, and obviously had a huge lesson through Emerald Ash Borer around the time when I first started at the city. So just to note that that doesn't mean we're not working on it. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Understood. I know how hard you guys work. But just on that note, on the pest and disease management strategy, I think it was a delegation from Ecology Ottawa that spoke about that. And that is something that concerns me because I do live in an area where there is a significant amount of invasive species buckthorn. Can we just confirm that when we do the tree canopy cover estimates, when you look at the percentage, that it would include areas, buckthorn would be counted, for example, as tree cover, given its height, size?
I might pass this on to Nick, but just to start, it really would depend on the size of buckthorn that we're talking about. Like, I've been in areas of the city where buckthorn is literally as tall as trees. And in that case, it would get captured as canopy. Our canopy cover has it with the technology that they're using, there's a certain height limit that it's capturing, and it can sense that height limit. And so I think it's 2 meters. Yeah. So 2 meters. And so anything under 2 meters wouldn't be captured, and over would be.
Yeah. So that is I'll just mention that is a concern of mine. I've got kilometers of buckthorn that on the geo map, it looks like we've got sufficient canopy cover, but it is something that I was not disappointed to see that we wouldn't be able to do, but I completely understand given the restrictions, but I will probably be back on that. I'll leave that topic for today. Just with respect to, I know we had some delegations asking about native trees, and I know I've asked this question before, and understand when we're dealing in urban environments that there are some non-native species that are best for hardy urban environments when we're looking at tree planting. I'm wondering if there'll be any consideration as we move along for maybe putting some parameters around where native trees could only be planted, like for example, in parks or grassy areas, parks and green spaces, and to try to limit the non-native species to those hardier environments, like on medians or whatever the case may be.
Through you, Chair. So we will be, through the tree planting strategy, creating tree planting lists for various scenarios. So in scenarios where we're doing reforestation or afforestation projects, absolutely 100% native trees. Open areas of parks, really appropriate for native trees. It gets trickier, as we've discussed, in urban areas with harsher environments, and sometimes the trade-off is a native tree that's going to have a very difficult time surviving versus a non-invasive, non-native that will grow to full maturity and contribute to the urban forest. Working towards building and creating better growing spaces for trees in the urban area will give us more opportunities to perhaps introduce more native trees into those areas that will be successful over the long term.
Thank you for that. I do have other questions, but I'm going to actually take myself off because I see there's a lot of hands up. But I just wanted to say thank you very much for all the work. And I was really excited to read about the new tree planting strategy. In particular, I mentioned the equity concerns, and that's a real issue in my neighborhood. So I was really pleased to see part of the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carr. Councillor Hill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My first question is about the FTEs and the capacity requirements. From my perspective, just a suburban councillor who commutes in, and I regularly go past Slack Road and Woodruff, where we've got a devastated forest out there from the NCC, and I would think that the staff capacity that we need to increase isn't necessarily the FTE component, but it's the casuals, it's the part-times, it's the interns, it's the co-op programs, it's the, getting students out and volunteers out to actually put acorns in the ground and saplings and all that kind of stuff. And I just, from a process perspective, can you speak to that component? Because to me, that's the getting it done piece. And I know we've spoken a lot about the policy and the administration, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about how we're actually getting more trees out there.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Absolutely, there's a resource out there that we can utilize in terms of our outreach and stewardship activities. Part of our outreach and stewardship strategy will be, to build that suite of stewardship activities that high school students can participate in, individual residents, community groups can participate in, whether it's tree planting or mulching or putting tree protection on trees for whippersnippers, that kind of thing, removing buckthorn, of course, in forested areas. The capacity building that we need right now is within our operations. So our larger scale tree planting operations to be able to free up the staff that are running that day-to-day operations to be able to plan ahead with our urban forest management plan. But there is an opportunity for more community-based programs. We have to develop them, and that's what the tree planting strategy is going to help us to do.
Okay, thank you. And to kind of build on that, I talked a bit about that slack forest that really concerns me every time I go by it. From your perspective, we share this city of Ottawa with the NCC and some of their land, and I know they have their independent policies and procedures with regard to their lands and their forestry and such. But is it sufficient for what we need? I would use that specific site as an example where there are local residents that live in that area, and the impacts of, devastated actions in those forested areas impacts on our local residents, but we don't necessarily control the levers to repopulate those forested areas. So are you comfortable with the current policies and procedures that the NCC has with regards to forestry operations? And if not, are there any things that we as a city should be doing in order to engage with the NCC on that topic?
Thanks for the question, through you, Chair. I guess in short, yeah, we are comfortable with the plans that they have in place. They were involved in the development of the urban forest management plan, and we were involved in their consultations on their forest strategy for the NCC lands. And they have various different sort of strategies for the different elements of the type of land that they have, and they face different challenge. Some of the parts of their land that they have trees on have the same kind of challenges that we face, and some are different, but we work pretty closely with them. The canopy cover assessment was done in partnership with the NCC and the city of Gatineau. In terms of their capacity, I can't really comment on that. But in terms of the way that they have laid out their sort of priorities and management plan, we do feel comfortable, with what they've got in place. I think that with these extreme weather events, everybody is in the same boat where it came at us, and we, as some of the delegations talked about, we knew that this was coming with the kind of changes in weather patterns and that kind of thing. But I think everybody is probably playing catch up at this time. So that's probably the one.
No, thank you very much. And my last question, I think it's a coordination function within the city. As a suburban councillor, a lot of my new growth has multi-use pathways going in front of their homes. And a part of the concern that I have with that is that it eats into that frontage. I forget the proper term there, but I don't know that we can actually use that postage stamp of green space in front of houses to host mature trees. And so I just want to make sure that there's a good coordination function between, the planners and such on how those setbacks work to make sure that there's actually capacity for that, because I have seen a few new developments where I don't know if it's pilots on these 8-foot wide multi-use pathways in the suburbs, or if it's completely mainstreamed now, but just I would identify that as something that may have a second order effect that we didn't completely consider in the front end.
Thank you so much, through you, Chair. This is really good information, and thanks so much for bringing it to my attention, because this is, so we have the planning foresters that work with Nick and I in our group. They are reviewing all plans, all site plans and plans of subdivision that come forward in the urban area, and looking at the design, the tree retention, tree protection, and landscape plans for those sites and how we are fitting in trees. So since we spoke about this the other day, I've flagged that to them, and we want to start looking at this potentially sort of new approach and see if that is impacting our ability to get trees in on those streets where that sort of typology is being used. So thank you for flagging it. And that's why we're there, to be part, and we're part of the development review team, providing comments on all the applications that come in. And that's the kinds of things we're looking for. Scenarios where there might not be any trees because the setback might not be sufficient. But I'll also say that this is the kind of thing that will be considered, the setback thing is the kind of thing that will be considered through the new zoning bylaw as well, because the zoning folks are putting a bit of a tree focus on their investigations into new zoning for the city, and understanding how we can ensure that the zoning that we're putting in place enables us to have trees in residential, well, all over the city, residential neighborhoods specifically. So thank you so much.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much to both of you. I appreciate all the work you've done. I've noticed the difference with the tree bylaw. It's made an impact. And the fact that foresters are now going to committee of adjustment, as well as, just speaking out to and checking on properties before they're approved, is made a huge difference. Sorry about that. I'm a bit short, still fighting a cold. And I want to commend you for that work, because I know that it was really important, and you had a big hand in it. So move forward. And we have lots of projects coming up, and intensification is always going to be at odds with trees. And it's a constant battle. I'm going to see a lot of intensification, especially around transit-oriented development. And I think residents need to know how the decisions are made. There are instances where some trees will be lost based on projects, but there's others where there is a possibility of saving it. And I want to make sure that forestry is right in there to help preserve those possibilities, and make sure that there's no situations where it's neglect that causes the trees to be lost because they weren't wanted in the first place. They were considered to be in the way by the developer. So I'd like to sort of get a better idea of if you can describe the working relationship. Are you right in the room when we're talking, when the planner is working with the developer on these issues?
Thanks so much for the question, through you, Chair. Yeah, this sort of setting, I guess what I've been calling like setting expectations around how the decisions are being made, is a really important part of this. And for your last question there, yes, that's exactly it. We are in the room, we're on. So in scenarios of site plan or plan of subdivision, we're on that review team, and we are the same amount, a part of that team as the engineers and the planners and everything. So we're on that core team. For infill development scenarios, same thing. So we're the planning foresters and our forestry inspectors, if it's just going to building permit, are talking with the engineers that are on the file and the committee of adjustment planners, and are right there, and the developers as well. And a lot of communication with the developers on what's happening on the site. And I would say that in some cases, some of these infill sites, we are some of the people that are spending the most time talking to the developers on what's happening on the site. That's just an anecdotal observation, but we really do spend a lot of time on these things. And around the setting expectations, when we developed the tree bylaw, we created this sort of like this diagram, and it's on the website, on the tree bylaw website. There's a section called planning around trees, and the diagram is right there, and it goes over basically like rules for how we decide when tree permits would be issued or not on a development site like that. And it's based on the allowable building footprint. So trees that are within that allowable building footprint are like right on the edge. those trees are going to be difficult trees to preserve, unless the owner is really keen on pushing forward with preserving those and sort of changing their pattern. Those are difficult. When the trees are outside of, in the right of way, especially the city right of way at the front or outside of that, those are the trees we're looking to preserve and working with the developers on how that can happen. And it's been really incredible. Our planning forester who works on committee of adjustment files, the kinds of changes she's been able to affect on, whether it comes to moving a basement slightly in so that the tree roots are protected, and then the first floor is still cantilevered out, and the canopies above that, we've seen that multiple times, and that's the kind of change we've been able to affect through these new processes. So planning around trees section is where that is, and it's a great section to share with residents if you're getting questions about this, but that's where it.
Oh, I absolutely am. And I appreciate the infill. I think are working towards success, and you've just described it. But the bigger projects we're talking about 16-story buildings, 30-story buildings, everything. There's going to be tree loss, and there's a lack of trust because they've seen so much tree loss in the past that it's about building the trust that we really do care about trees and that we're going to see them replaced. The whole 2-to-1 ratio scenario. I think there's a lot of concern that it's not really going to happen. They're going to lose these 50-year-old to 100-year-old trees to have little saplings. What is being done to make sure that we have a robust replacement when in those scenarios?
Thanks. Through you, Chair. That's a really good point. And on these tighter sites that you're talking about, it can be hard, but our new tree protection bylaw does have a compensation requirement built into it. And so on the infill sites, depending on the size of the tree, that's being removed, if it's between 30 and 49 centimeters, it's 2-to-1, and above 50 centimeters, it's 3-to-1. And that involvement that we've built in to these processes for whether it be infill development or site plant, like bigger developments, is the foresters are also commenting on tree planting as well and space for trees. So that's been a really big change for us in the last few years, is talking about space for trees and space for adequate soil volume to plant trees so that they can actually grow to their full capacity at maturity. So that integration that we've been able to do is also pushing that, not just the tree retention side, but also the space for trees. So we have the compensation requirements built in for those smaller infill developments because they don't come with landscape plans, and so we're pushing to find space for that. If we don't, then we collect money for those trees and they go into our compensation accounts and are used for tree planting. With the site plan and plan of subdivision, we have as a part of the new OP, a new landscape plan terms of reference that guides how we deliver or what we ask for landscape plans, and our foresters are reviewing those landscape plans as well and pushing for that tree planting and adequate space is the important thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have I still got some time?
You do?
Okay, thank you. We heard from Angela in cafes about tree trenches, and I was interested in that, particularly in areas where we don't have the stormwater system. It's a system of ditches, that kind of thing. But I'm hoping that we can do better with more tree planting because it's not been a priority. And in terms of just our ditch maintenance programs as well. I don't know if you've been cross-pollinating with the people who deal with that, but is that something that we've looked at? I saw it in the notes. I did see it in the report, but I just wanted to get your take on it.
Sorry, we're through you, Chair. Who can answer it? I think I'll start at a high level and then give it to Tracy for some of the details. But just to say that, of course, through that work that we talked about with, and this isn't the stormwater side, this is the road right-of-way cross sections for local streets. Yep. That was a really important piece of work and sort of like I said, foundational piece of work in terms of moving these kinds of things forward, and that integration. And so through that, that's where the sort of concept of the joint utility trench under the sidewalk came to fruition for Ottawa, and that's solid there now. So that was a building block for us to be able to do some of the stuff that you're talking about. We've started to, and Tracy will talk about some examples that they've been involved in. And on our side, we've started to be involved in conversations about stormwater management in areas with the ditches and sort of approaches at a site level and beyond, and how that impacts trees. We're involved in those conversations at this time. I don't have any big updates or anything like that, but that is ongoing. And that's been, you know, we just highlighted some of the integration pieces that we've been doing, but really it's very broad. And people are coming to us now rather than us knocking down the door to get involved and get into meetings. And that's really positive. But over to you, Tracy.
I appreciate the work that's being done on that. And in areas that are our city right of ways, like mediums, I'm always getting asked, why don't you put more trees in mediums? You know, like Carling Avenue. How do we get that done?
So thank you. I think the next step, Martha's talked about our good integration that we now have on the development side. Through this management period, it's really going to be looking at how do we move forward integration with construction projects and infrastructure services. So right now, just on the stormwater side, we have been forestry's been working with stormwater services for a number of years on a pilot for stormwater tree planting and stormwater project. We're nearing the finish line on that one, so that will be coming. But through our integration with infrastructure services, getting in early to those projects, looking for opportunities to plant trees, opportunities for using trees and soil cells for stormwater. It's really critical that we get in early in those projects so we can affect change. We can establish good growing conditions for trees. We can look at opportunities for tree planting. If, you know, just as the foundation of a house can shift a little bit, can we shift something in a larger infrastructure project that we can now incorporate better spaces for trees?
Thank you. It was already asked about working with the NCC, and I appreciate that you partner with them. They're the ones that have all the buckthorn that I've seen. It's just kilometers of it. Are you aware of their plans on that? Because I see that in my Greenbelt in Bay Ward.
Sorry, can you I just missed the key item that you said.
Buckthorn. And in the NCC Greenbelt, it's very invasive and it spreads, of course, everywhere. And in terms of having native species, I feel like there's it just hasn't been dealt with sufficiently.
I'm not aware exactly. I don't know if Nick has anything to say on what their invasive species strategy is. Anyway, Nick, do you have any knowledge of that?
I don't have any direct knowledge of the NCC's plans to deal with buckthorn, nothing specific. But my understanding is they're taking much the same approach as we are at the city. We don't anticipate ever being able to eliminate buckthorn from the city's natural areas, from our rural areas, but we do manage it on a site-by-site basis to try and protect our most critical areas. And so you can see, for example, the NCC has done a lot of buckthorn removal along the Rideau River on their lands along the Rideau River, for example.
Okay, thank you. Equity, I'm glad this is a very important part of the report. And this week we're going to have a volunteer exercise for OCH where we're going to be tree planting. I really appreciate that because I think that's important that it's not just communities proactively asking, but that we're reaching out to communities as well because they may not be aware that they can ask for these things. So how is that done? I mean, OCH is one community, but there's other communities that don't get reached.
Thank you so much. And through you, Chair, I absolutely appreciate that. And that's going to be the big sort of new challenge that we're bringing to ourselves at this point with this. We have to do that work. And so we'll be as we plan out the project as our next step, starting tomorrow or maybe after next Wednesday. But we'll be looking at that, but also developing a consultation strategy. And so how we are going to reach some of those groups as we consult, and then and also so Ottawa Community Housing is a good example, people who are working in that realm, so that we can talk about, you know, what can we do to be successful in reaching those areas, and what does that look like? These are all the things that we have to figure out, and this is sort of the big push in this plan.
I appreciate that and happy to work with you on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Yeah, I can't imagine a better person than yourself and Councillor King to work with on that type of a strategy. Councillor Devine, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. You can hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Great. So thanks, Chair. I do have some comments, but also some questions for staff and a question for the mover of the current motion. So thank you, staff, for your dedication on this very important work. This conversation is not only one of my key areas of focus as a councillor, but it's also very personal for me. We've heard about the loss to our canopy from recent natural disasters, and Councillor Carr's motion reflects some of these events in the motion. My neighborhood of Arlington Woods was one of a small handful of communities that was flattened by tornadoes in 2018, where we lost 80% of our canopy. One immediate impact that we noticed from this loss was the rise in temperatures across our neighborhood, not just on the ground, but in everyone's second floor bedroom, which became several degrees warmer because of a loss of shade, which meant that everyone cranked up their air conditioning, which comes at a cost to our city's grid and makes our city's power grid more vulnerable. That's a natural consequence of losing trees, which provide shade. And as this is now happening more and more, I believe that it poses a greater threat to some of our core infrastructure, like our power grid. And on that subject, on that note, one of the delegates spoke about having general support for the UFMP, but spoke to a concern about a lack of urgency in the approach, in the objectives, and even in the language. And I do echo that concern, and I've spoken to staff about this already. In my opinion, and in the opinion of many, the restoration of our urban canopy and the accomplishment of our tree planting strategy is directly linked to the role that cities play in ensuring public health and safety. I think about the role of forestry as having parallels to Ottawa public health, and I see forestry as a preventative measure to protection in the same way that much of what police and fire services do is preventative. So when I hear staff mention that if their staffing capacity needs aren't supported, that their response will be to scope down or to proceed at a slower rate, that does concern me. Last week at Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee, we got a briefing from paramedic services of what might happen if we scope down and proceed at a slower rate when it comes to addressing our level 0 crisis, and there was no lack of urgency in that briefing. And so rather than us talking about trees and our canopy in terms of their value or their benefits, which is often the language I hear, what I'm looking to hear from staff and what I hope that my colleagues support is transitioning the way we look at this, not in terms of value and benefits, but in terms of urgency and necessity. And so my first question, just to Councillor Carr, if we are talking about the motion, and I certainly support the motion, but would you be open, Councillor Carr, to a friendly amendment to your motion to include in the whereas clauses a reference to the 2018 tornadoes as they had a severe and relevant impact to several Ottawa communities?
Hi, just to clarify. So, okay, yeah, my second clause is whereas the derecho in May 2022 and the ice storm, you just want to add in?
Yeah, whereas the tornadoes of 2018, like to add that to that list of disasters, they're all relevant to the loss of canopy we're talking about. And I know that my communities, as well as the communities of Dunrobin and Green, some of the communities would, I'm sure, feel heard if their loss was reflected in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I can include that. No problem.
Thank you very much. And then I have 3 questions for staff. So Martha, you made reference in your presentation to taking on a more proactive approach to our tree planting strategy as opposed to a responsive approach or a reactive approach. With regards to the Trees and Trust program, which is one of my favorite programs, but also I know it's not the most broadly known program, and it is a responsive program. Can you talk a little bit about how you might see Trees and Trust program change if you take a proactive approach to it?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Absolutely, the Trees and Trust program now, as you said, is reactive. So in order to move to proactive, it may not be the Trees and Trust program. It may look completely different. We have had some lessons learned and some challenges with our proactive full street replacements that we did for many years with EAB. So we've been there before. We do know that it needs to come with outreach and education to residents so that they understand why they're receiving a tree that they didn't ask for. We need buy-in from them to have a successful tree planting. Many locations that don't have a tree, it's residents may not know about the program, but they also may not want a tree for various reasons. So it's really important for us to develop a program that is widely known, and as Marcia has talked for many years about the culture change around trees, so that residents understand why they're getting it, how to care for it, why it's important to have it, how to maintain it. That is going to be, one of the first things is how do we develop that outreach and education around a program where residents are receiving a tree that they may not have asked for or may not particularly want on their front yard.
Yeah. Thank you. And I completely agree with you that we do need resident buy-in, because if they're not going to buy in, then they're not going to water the tree and the tree will fail and the program will fail. But I love the fact that there will be, taking the approach to residents and hopefully getting them to see the role that they and the tree that I hope they take care of will play in ensuring health and safety for all. Two more questions. In regards to your request for 2 new staff to be supported by to be covered by $250,000, you mentioned that the cost would be covered by transferring revenues away from the materials and services part of your budget. If I'm interpreting that correctly, can you let me know what might be lost in terms of materials and services, and whether there was an opportunity to request this new expense be covered without compromising another part of your budget?
Sure, I can respond to that question. So what we did is we reviewed basically some of the historical figures that we had in terms of our expenditures in our purchase services. And what we identified was that there was capacity in those accounts to be able to address this, what we consider to be a higher priority in terms of funding the additional FTEs without impacting basically the delivery of our services. So there's no downside at this point to say, well, if we transfer it, we're not going to be delivering X. The intent is still to deliver basically our programs as planned.
Thank you. So if there was a reference to transferring it from materials, does that mean, and forgive me if I didn't understand your answer in the first place, but does that mean that by hiring 2 new staff, we will lose X number of trees that could be planted from those funds?
No, Chair, just to clarify, basically those are our broader purchase services. So they include a number of different items. So if we move the reason why basically we're looking for council authority to move the dollars forward is because we're moving it from purchase services to a compensation account. So we require council approval to do that change. But that change will not result in us planting less trees. In fact, it's going to be the opposite. It's going to allow us to focus on resourcing the tree planting strategy, at least getting that kick-started. So you're going to actually see more trees being planted than less.
Well, that makes me happy. And my last question to staff. So in regards to what I was talking about, and we've spoken about this before, about the need for, to shift the culture and the language towards a sense of urgency. I don't know whether or not, and I know that outreach and education is going to be a central part of this second phase of your plan. So I don't know to what extent your outreach and education and communication strategy has already been drafted, but can you comment as to whether or not that outreach and education and communications will reflect a certain level of urgency to it? i.e. the role that trees play and what happens, what potential risks happen if we don't restore our canopy?
Thank you, through you, Chair. So we are in the beginning stages of developing our outreach and engagement strategy. We have a request for input right now on Engage Ottawa, and we are seeing a very high uptake in that from community of what what types of stewardship activities, what types of things do you want to know about? Do you need to know about? What types of tools would you need to do the projects that you would like to do? We will be engaging with Ottawa Public Health on and seeing where, we talk about this integration with planning and infrastructure services. Ottawa Public Health is another point of contact that we can make to integrate our programs into Ottawa Public Health and vice versa. So where can we promote what we're doing and with that public health lens on it? So absolutely, we're in the beginning stages of our outreach and engagement strategy though.
All right, thank you to staff and thank you, Chair.
Sorry, I'm just going to add one more thing there through you, Chair, Councillor Devine. We have built this relationship with Ottawa Public Health already, and they were involved in some of their staff was involved in the development of the UFMP from the beginning phases. They were key partners with us, working with our policy planning folks on the development of the official plan. And so we want to continue that partnership. And we've had sort of somewhat regular meetings with them in the context of climate resiliency, which of course our work is very directly linked with. So that integration is happening as well. Thank you.
Well, you have, your missions are aligned. So I'm glad you're working in close tandem with them. Thank you, staff, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank staff for the in-depth report, especially the commitment to outreach and community engagement that's outlined in one of the recommendations. The report states that it will enhance existing programs and incentives and create new opportunities for the community to understand and care for its green assets. I was just wondering if staff could comment on the current work in terms of coordinating with residents who are undertaking tree planting projects with a specific view towards removing roadblocks to those undertakings. And this is why I'm also very satisfied that the report is talking about trying to break down the silos between different departments and units within the city. Because I hear on an ongoing basis the challenges around roadblocks. So I'm just wondering if you could outline some of the coordinating efforts that you're making with residents.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So we work regularly with community associations. We have landscape architects that work with community groups who are interested in doing tree planting projects. We do a number of small to medium size afforestation projects with volunteer community groups every spring and every fall. We have certainly seen a rise in the interest in groups doing projects with us, but also doing projects on their own. And I think that's where the frustration is coming in, and that we need to develop those processes. And that's what our outreach and stewardship coordinator is doing, is to develop those internal processes. So there's one central intake, one point of contact with the city. So they're not being shipped to different departments in those silos to try and navigate how they can do their projects. So that is coming. We're working with a number of groups already this spring on buckthorn removal projects and tree planting projects. So that will come as we develop those processes to be able to assist them with their projects.
Excellent. I do appreciate that because my office over the last year had correspondence with residents who had obtained grants to undertake tree planting. And it's not the fault of forestry, but they were having challenges with parks sitting down with forestry to identify specific sites. And the criticism that we would hear is that, it's so hard to plant a tree in a park, and it really shouldn't be. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm happy that we are looking at this tree planting strategy, and that there's a recommendation that says it will take a proactive approach to tree planting on city property within the road right of way in parks and on other city properties. Because like I said, it shouldn't be a challenge for a resident who has actually found dollars to undertake a planting exercise with the city. The other item that I would agree with my colleagues on is about the proactive nature of the tree in trust program and looking at different models to be more proactive rather than reactive. Because within the last term, we had a great initiative under the Building Better Revitalized Neighborhoods project in Vanier South and Overbrook to really identify sites. And we undertook a scenario where dollars were spent to on consultants to identify sites for planting, and we identified over 380 properties. But the challenge, of course, was getting the owners, and often the challenge is that these are multi-dwelling units. So identifying the owners to get permission. And so we definitely need a better model there, because the community was all excited. We identified all of these properties, and the uptake, it wasn't as aggressive as we would have liked. I would hazard to say that I think that there was some level of success, but I found that was a unique model to go directly to the residents and ask them to participate in the program. But I would agree with my colleagues that whatever the replacement of the program that we seek should be more proactive than reactive. Just my question and observations. Thank you, Chair.
Great questions and comments, Councillor King. Thank you, Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. To staff, if you were to ask the average River Ward resident if they felt the city of Ottawa was winning the war on tree loss, what do you think they would say?
Through you, Chair, I would hazard a guess that after the 5 years we've just been through, they would say no.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable sentiment that many people see. It's one thing, though, to differentiate between loss due to natural occurrences versus the city's ability to respond to that and get trees planted as soon as possible. When construction started at the South Keys LRT station, it's not an LRT station yet, the transit station, the city clear cut hundreds of trees around the station. Public didn't, not a peep from the public, but hundreds of trees were removed. And there's no substantial replanting plan coming. Right beside it, the Wendy Stewart stormwater ponds are going to be dredged later this year. Staff have to go in and do some cyclical work in the ponds, going to take out a number of trees. And when my staff say, all right, what's the tree planting plan? Well, those are scrub trees and we don't favor them. So again, only a minor fraction of trees that are coming down are going to be replaced. That's not good enough. It seems that when the city takes trees down, we don't hold ourselves up to the same replacing standard as we impose on private landowners. And as we see in River Ward, throughout River Ward with infill, for people who actually have the financial means, like at 1110 Fisher, where the community hired a tree expert that said, contrary to the proponents' tree reports that said all the abutting trees will be okay, their independent arborist said the exact opposite, that the trees between this property and a school, which provide privacy for school children, are going to be impacted. So it's frustrating that trees don't seem to be put on the same priority as maybe some other factors when we're considering developments within the city. So I definitely embrace this plan, and my residents certainly embrace trees and want to see more trees. I concur with comments about trees and trust program. I know we've had conversations in the past. It should be automatic. We should inform the landowner of what our intentions are, that there's an opportunity to engage and respond before we do it. I do think staff should have the authority under certain cases to accept opposition to a tree, but in most cases, the tree should be replanted automatically. Just other notes in general, I'm just parks, I do believe, to Councillor King's comment, a lot of parks in my ward are large in nature, and yes, there's ample room to run around. There's no amenities in most of the green space. And I think there are opportunities to plant, but also to engage the community and talk about other fruit trees or food bearing trees that we can engage the community on. Schoolyards, when schools were built in River Ward, the amount of land allocated for schools is massive. And again, we're not talking about space that have amenities on it. It's just open green space where we cut the grass. And again, there are opportunities to add trees. And again, obviously it's the school property, but there are opportunities there. In North Carlington, when Carlington was built, it's a bit of an odd situation. The developer at the time, which was a federal crown at that time, stored lumber in certain sections of the street, and they built around these stockpiles of inventory. And as a result, we have some uniquely shaped streets. I call them bulb outs, where you have basically green space, and whether it's like a crescent or there's a street that's linear shaped east-west, and at the end you've got these bulbs that really serve no purpose other than we cut the grass. We have to look for these nuggets within urban wards in particular, where green space exists, where we can engage the community, and rather than pay to cut grass, we can actually plant trees and have a net benefit to the community. So just concerns about tree loss, the proliferation of tree loss, the not 1-for-1 replacement ratio for projects like LRT or some city public works jobs that happen, and an expectation for my residents that we need to do much more to increase to protect trees, to replace trees when they have to come down, and to have a net increase when we have natural disasters that take trees down. We just can't plant the same number of trees that we planted last year. There has to be a significant increase in the following years for those natural disasters. So just so I'm clear going forward from here, the Trees and Trust program, have staff committed that this is going to be looked at and there's going to be a new direction going forward, or do you need additional direction from us, perhaps at council, to articulate what our expectations are?
Through you, Chair, thanks for that. And thanks for all of your comments, Councillor Brockington. No, we have been hearing this loud and clear about the Trees and Trust program and this move to proactive from reactive. And so I think that we are well on our way with that. And it's just now to sit down and do the work to figure out, as Tracy talked about earlier, exactly how we're going to do this. So thank you for that.
Okay, thanks for that. And yeah, I think we've heard enough from councillors here, and I got Councillor Tooney next on the list here, but I think we've heard enough from councillors here about that proactive nature of the Trees and Trusts, that automatic replanting, whether it's a letter in their mailbox saying that your tree is going to be replaced or something else. And if there's feedback, then fine, but your tree is going to be replaced. Appreciate that direction is taken from this committee. Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just one quick thing. I actually want to say kudos to staff. For many decades, I've lived in this house, bucking getting a tree. My wife has always wanted a tree. And we actually got, I don't even know what kind of tree this is, a ginkgo biloba. And the staff were very effective in coming in and putting the hole in the ground, putting the tree in the ground. And I should have done it a long time ago. So thank you to staff. I think they do a terrific job. And just word to our council colleagues, when I tell people about this program, they're excited. A lot of people don't know it exists. And we have a great opportunity to start getting more trees on lawns. So I just want to thank staff. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, great comments, Councillor Tierney. Thank you. And I think going along with that too, sometimes trees are rotted out. They have to remove the stumps too. Our stump removal team is excellent as well, and they do good work. I know it's been a lot more work recently with the devastation that we've seen. I do want to just go through a couple of pieces here and also thank and support the work of staff. Obviously, you've had a big ramp up. And we needed a quick ramp up, right? We had the official plan, the tree protection bylaw, the infill piece. We now have the the bylaw review work plan going on as well. So a lot happening, and we need that to move quickly. So thank you for all of your work over the years. I think we're in a much better place now. I do have a few questions just from the delegations that we had. So on the data on the flyovers, when is that flyover data coming back to the community and committee? When will we see that public data?
So we're just in the beginning phases of starting to work on the analysis, and we plan for it to come back towards the end of this year. So later in the fall is when we'll be reporting back on that. And if we run into any hurdles, then it might be into January, but that's what our plans are right now. We're working on it right now.
And will that come to committee directly? Is that a memo that's issued? How's that get released to the public?
I think it would be a memo likely, and we could come to committee if there's an interest in doing a presentation on it. No problem.
That's very helpful. Because obviously we heard a lot about data. The 30 centimeter diameter base height in suburban areas, which was a motion we passed last term of council. I know there was consultation on that. Can you just update committee on that piece?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. We're going to be bringing this forward in the fall as well. We have to do that consultation piece soon, and now we're coming up against the summer. So we're just sort of strategizing with our business support team on exactly the best approach for that. But that it's, I guess from my perspective, it's a simple adjustment, and we plan to come forward early in the fall on that.
Thank you. That's also very helpful. I know a lot of suburban colleagues, I'm sure, will appreciate that piece too. On the question around permits, fines, and sort of basic information about this, is that something that the city has, and can it produce that type of information for residents in a rolled up fashion?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the number of permits that we issue every year, we've been reporting on that, I think, for about 8 years, 2 terms of council now. And usually we come forward with a memo every spring on that. This year we've taken a different approach, and we actually have the information on Open Data Ottawa. And so we can provide that link to everyone. I think it was, anyways, we can provide that link to everyone after this, and the data is there, and we plan to continue doing it that way moving forward. But I will caution that the data for this year, or the last 2 years, is what you'll see since the new bylaw has come into effect. It isn't really comparable to our data of the past, because the bylaw has changed so much in various different ways in terms of size and the way we do the permitting and stuff like that. And also, just to echo, one of our delegations talked about sort of looking at the number of permits issued as a reflection of sort of how we're doing. You know, the urban forest is a sort of an always changing entity with the development and storms and, you know, forest growth and all that kind of thing. And so really we like to focus on that canopy cover as our data element to understand how the forest is doing.
Perfect. That's a very fulsome answer, and really appreciate that that's out there. With regard to the Trees and Trust program, when do you anticipate timing wise that could be changed and to come back? I know obviously there's a reporting period here on the urban forest management plan, and that's a longer reporting period, but in terms of the interim measures for that, what kind of timeline would you be looking at for a change in that program?
Yeah, so I think we need to sort of so we have a couple of steps we need to do. So we need to do our project plan for the tree planting strategy and do some consultation on that, and then identify our priorities. We've all talked about this today. It's clear that that's a priority, right? So I don't expect that to change. And then we have to start doing our work on that and looking at exactly how this could roll out. So I would expect that it's something towards the end of next year kind of thing that we might be able to come back. We haven't determined our timeline yet. So when we develop that project plan, then we'll have a better timeline on some of these sort of early action items that we've been talking about.
Yeah, we may look at rolling it out on a smaller scale to begin with, like have the Trees and Trust program still running across the city, just to evaluate that, you know, what is that outreach piece? We don't want to roll it out citywide potentially if we need to really work more on that communication with the homeowners. We did have fairly good communication with homeowners with our full street replacements for Emerald Ash Borer. It was still difficult. We still got a lot of pushback. from some residents that didn't want the tree, and that creates operational issues when we're in front of your house with a tree and you want us to leave. So but on the flip side, there are many people that don't know about Trees and Trust. We can, in the meantime, get the word out more about Trees and Trust through our website, through social media, to get more people participating in that. But I see it, and Martha and I we haven't really talked about how we roll this out. But in my mind, I see it rolling out on a small scale to begin with, and then going citywide.
That's really helpful information. And yeah, I think that letter in the mailbox in advance, just saying, hey, we're planning to replant a tree here. If you have any questions, let us know, and you'll know pushback then, so that it avoids the kind of person on the street with the tree ready to go without having informed them in advance. But just wanted to say thanks so much for all of your work. We want to support you with the resources you need to be ambitious here. Obviously, it's going to be very important in the next little while. And this is an extremely important topic for residents of Ottawa. So thank you. Vice Chair Carr, I want to give you a chance to just wrap up on your motion before we vote on the main item.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I'll just make an editorial comment about the Trees and Trust. I would love to see a proactive program. I've wanted one replaced on my lawn for years, but my husband somehow thinks that his extensive Halloween display prevents him from having one. And I know bylaws were revised for little free libraries, but not Halloween displays. So I'll be sending bylaw after him this year until I get my tree. Anyhow, I just wanted to just speak quickly to the motion before we hopefully carry it or vote on it. Today we heard loud and clear from all delegates and councillors the importance that tree issues have, whether it's tree canopy, tree maintenance, tree planting. So I think everybody will support my motion, I hope. We've had an opportunity today to look at the achievements from the Urban Forest Master Plan over the first term of management, and also seeing how we've needed to adjust that work plan to account for unforeseen circumstances, and the fact that ultimately it was a really ambitious plan with not enough resources. So I was pleased to hear you're adding a couple more resources, but when I look at the plan for what you have ahead, I personally don't think it's sufficient. I don't think this area is resourced enough. We're hearing the cries from everybody about needing more resources. And so what I'm essentially, this motion is asking for, recognizing that this is not linked to budget 2024, that will be a separate process, but I'm asking for a clear picture of the work plan that has been presented as part of the UFMP to get an actual look at how many resources that you think will be necessary, taking into account the level of risks, the different resourcing level, and if you could bring that back to committee. So I'll just, do I read in the therefore we?
Yes, you can just read the therefore be it resolved.
Perfect. So I'll just read the last clause. So therefore be it resolved that staff report back to committee with a fully costed version of the work plan presented in the Urban Forest Management Plan update, and include the anticipated FT requirement to carry out the work plan and outline work plan scenarios and timelines based on resource availability.
Thanks very much, Vice Chair Carr. Is that motion carried? Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate that one. And is the item carried as amended? Can we carry this item? Okay, thank you very, very much. Appreciate all your work, and thanks for that update. Next up is in-camera items. I don't believe there's any in-camera items. And then next is motions of which notice has been previously given. Councillor Hill has a substitute motion which was circulated to the one introduced at the last committee meeting. Councillor, do you wish to introduce your replacement motion?
Yes, if I may, Chair, I'll just read the therefore be it resolved. Those are the only pieces that changed from this. Therefore be it resolved that staff be directed to investigate options through financial institutions and other levels of government for green financing models that would encourage home buyers to invest in green and energy efficient technologies as part of their new home purchase by reducing the upfront financing barriers. And therefore be it further resolved that staff review options to expand existing city programs to create green and energy efficient investment incentives for new home buyers. And therefore be it further resolved that staff provide an update on both efforts for Environment Committee's review by Q2 of 2024.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll see if there's any questions by committee, and I'll ask staff to potentially come up here as well.
Mr. Chair, if you'd like, I could speak to this for 1 minute. That might answer any questions that folks may have.
Did you want to motivate?
I think if I just give a quick introduction, that would speak
Absolutely.
to it.
Go ahead.
So this motion kind of came from two spots, Mr. Chair. First off, I had a great conversation with one of the members of my community association who took full advantage of the Better Home Loans program for a retrofit. And secondly, I had the opportunity to visit the site of a pilot program out in my ward, where they're actually doing a greenfield geothermal development. And in discussing quite at length with the institution that was doing that development, it was identified that the consumer barrier to purchasing these homes was more significant than they'd perhaps anticipated, and that was a key barrier to incentivizing broader application to this. So essentially, because the current market for green technology in homes is geared towards early adopters, which would be those who have a passion, knowledge, and financial assets to invest in the new technology, the goal of this motion is really to reduce the barriers in order to broadly mainstream investment in premium environmental upgrades such as geothermal heat pumps and solar panels, et cetera. Goal is for the city here to act as a thought leader and to provide coordination function amongst our aligned stakeholders, recognizing that we're limited in what we could do internally, and in no way am I suggesting that the city should try and go it alone or to broadly subsidize anything, but we can work with the numerous other organizations that share the goal of increasing environmental home upgrades. Organizations that I'm thinking of would include the Ottawa Home Builders Association, CMHC, financial institutions, the broader construction industry, advocacy groups, AMO, FCM, and both other levels of government, who I believe all have the shared goal of trying to increase these types of green upgrades in home ownership. So if anybody has any questions for me, happy to address it. Other than that, Mr. Chair, that's all.
Thank you, Councillor Hill, and I understand you worked with staff on this too and changed some of the report back timelines, so appreciate that. Councillor Devine. And we can't hear you at this point. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry, bad timing. I've got all kinds of stuff happening. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Yeah, I just I sent a question to Councillor Hill. I just had a question about the second be it resolved. Therefore, be it resolved that staff review options to expand existing city programs to create green and an energy efficient investment incentive for new home buyers. Just so question to the mover, I don't know much about the city programs that you're referring to. So could you let me know what are the existing city programs that you are requesting that staff review?
So I'm not trying to situate the estimate, but I do know that the Better Home Loans program currently exists successfully for retrofit type operations, although for new builds it would be limited. So there's some space over the next 6 months or so if staff were to identify something in that area that could be incorporated. But certainly, to reiterate, the key thing that I'm looking for is for the city to provide somewhat of a coordination function, a liaison function, in order to look into options with those stakeholder groups for whom I believe have a shared interest in this outcome, and for which I think we could find some good option space. I'll give you an example, Councillor Devine. If a person was eligible to get a mortgage of $500,000 for a new build, and their option was to get a $500,000 house with natural gas, or to get an upgrade to a $570,000 house that has a geothermal heat pump and perhaps some solar paneling with it. The consumer trend at present would be that they would likely get the natural gas option. But if there was a mechanism within the financial institutions for which, for example, that green component of the principal could be coupled and then back-ended, or if there were other options that could be presented to support that, it would further incentivize them. So this is simply looking at option space to reduce the upfront barriers that currently exist to create outcomes that I think this city wants, which is improving the environmental technology and a premium in new builds.
Okay. And as I think I conveyed to you, while I'm certainly supportive of the innovative approach you are taking to looking at how we can get these kinds of advancements done, because I'm not sufficiently familiar with the existing city programs you're referring to, I never know whether or not a request to expand city programs might mean steering a city program outside of the scope and parameters of what it's originally meant for. And I don't have any comment from staff on this and what might be the potential implications of expanding existing city programs Is there anyone from staff who can comment on that element of the motion?
Yes, there is. And so we'll ask Andrea Flowers to speak to that and any other questions that might come up for staff. Thanks, Andrea.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. Councillor Devine, our existing Better Homes Ottawa loan program uses a mechanism called a local improvement charge. And that local improvement charge, we are going to explore to see whether or not we can use that mechanism to apply additional costs to the tax bill so that the homeowner would pay it back over time. So that's a very concrete example of how this program we think could be used. To your question around whether it expands the mandate, yes, it does. That program was developed primarily for retrofits to overcome the barrier that we see when people make energy investments. And then if they sell their home, the cost of those energy retrofits may be borne by the person who did it, as opposed to staying with the property itself. The same logic is easy to apply for new builds, so that if we have a cost which is applied at the beginning and it stays with the property, as do the benefits, then we think it can be looked at over a longer period of time.
Okay, thank you. I'll see what other of my colleagues might have to say about the motion. I may put my hand back up, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm generally supportive of this motion, but I was just wondering if I could ask the mover whether he'd be amenable to a small amendment or change in addition where we state staff be directed to investigate options through financial institutions as well as energy utilities. And my suggestion here is due to the fact that many utilities utilize on-bill financing. There's many examples in other jurisdictions such as Manitoba that's provided over $370 million in loans to support energy efficiency model measures. These are typically for upgrades, but it'd be interesting to see whether this type of financing for new construction could be advanced by energy utilities such as Hydro Ottawa and others. So just wondering if you were amenable to that addition to your motion.
I believe so. Could you speak to specifically where it goes? But I think that's very amenable.
Therefore, be it resolved that staff be directed to investigate options through financial institutions, energy utilities, and other levels of government.
Yeah, I'm amenable to that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Councillor King. So that's a friendly amendment into the motion. Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Chair. I'm still seeking clarification about the basics here of what this motion will realize should it be successful. So can staff just articulate for me your understanding of what this motion would direct? What's
Well, maybe I'll start, Chair, with the rationale on the gap I think that this motion addresses. Right now, staff has no direction to work with financial institutions. To the friendly amendment, I don't think we have explicit direction to work with the utility providers on things like on-bill financing. And I think it fills a gap in some of the other work that we have done or we are starting to do as it relates to high performance development standards. So some of the criticism that we heard for the proposed high performance development standards was that it wouldn't capture anything under 10 units. And this could help that. So it starts to look at incentives across the board for all technologies. In terms of where that goes, of course, we don't know. We haven't done the exploration yet, and we don't know how it will align with either changes that the province is making to the energy code for buildings or council's future decisions related to the high performance development standard. But I do believe that it fills a gap in addressing smaller residential infill, for example, that the high performance development would not capture in terms of incentives.
Again, just so I'm clear, is the intention here to assist homeowners or building owners with a financial subsidy or assistance to proceed with adding high efficiency amenities in the home that they wouldn't otherwise be able to afford or pursue?
That's how I understand the motion, but I defer to the mover for his clarification.
I think that's a component. I don't think it needs to be limited to subsidization. I mean, if you're qualified for a $500,000 mortgage and the home you want to buy that has premium environmental upgrades costs $550,000, perhaps a mechanism that we could unlock here is for that additional $50,000 to not count against your qualification so that you can in fact purchase that home despite the fact that that component otherwise presently would take you over your qualification limit. That's an example. I'm not saying we can get there. I'm just saying with some research, perhaps that's an angle we could get to. I gave another example of perhaps where that additional green principled component could get bundled, and instead of being initially part of your mortgage, that could be back-ended to a payment system where once you've paid the entirety of your mortgage, perhaps that could start payment at the back end. So these are just preliminary discussions that I've had with some of those stakeholders that I've spoken to, but I think it just needs to be formalized. And I think there's some real opportunity potentially for some low-hanging fruit to get us into a place that I think we want to go.
Yeah, I guess what I'm struggling with is I'm confused what role the city of Ottawa has in all this. Are we expecting taxpayers to subsidize upgrades to people's homes?
If I can, Mr. Chair, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking for staff to look into options with those stakeholders to see if there are mechanisms that we can reduce that initial financing barrier, because that is the problem from a consumer trends perspective when they are looking at purchasing. So there's statistics in the market right now that would say if you have the option to buy a natural gas house or a heat pump house, most people will go with a natural gas house because of the costing there. What I'm saying is if there's a mechanism that we can work with those institutions in order to innovatively find a solution to that financing piece. I'm not saying subsidize it. I'm saying, but to be innovative with the way that mortgage piece is working, then let's see if we can implement that.
Okay, I'll have to take this online because I completely do not understand the role that the city would play in this regard. So I'm not going to vote against this, but I'll take it upon myself to sit with Councillor Hill to better understand why we would want to direct our staff time and resources in this matter. I'm not saying the end result isn't worthy. I think the end result is worthy to make improvements, but I'm just trying to wrap my head around the city of Ottawa's role here. So thank you, Chair.
I think it's fair comments. Because I think there is a larger federal provincial role and otherwise role to play here. Perhaps this is a information piece, coordination, that type of piece that's coming forward. But I don't think it's obviously our responsibility to do this, but to look into it. I think that's what the motion's getting at, is to look into it with other orders and other financial institutions. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. I think I share my colleague, Councillor Brockington's confusion and uncertainty over the end results of the motion. And I'm not sure if, and I guess I wish I understood it better, and that's on me. And I'm not sure whether that, what position that puts me in terms of supporting it. And I suppose I echo the question about whether or not this is a responsibility borne by the city. And ultimately what I'm trying to understand is whether or not, because I believe I heard, Andrea, I believe I heard staff saying, so I suppose my question is whether or not this ends up being a new cost that would be borne either by the taxpayer as a whole or the property taxpayer, i.e. the purchaser, or whether or not without this implementation, this would be a cost that would be borne by the builder developer. So I can't tell if there is a savings to be done here. Forgive me for not understanding. I'm not sure if the savings is to the developer builder, to the resident, or so forth. Can you shed any more clarity on that, Andrea?
Through you, Chair, Councillor, that's part of the exploration. I think we have to look at the combination of the incentives that are referenced, as well as the tools that municipalities have available to them, and then present what our findings are. Some of I think one of the reasons that the motion helps staff is because there is not currently an entity who is doing that coordination amongst other levels of government or the utilities or those other stakeholders. And the municipality has unique tools that are not available to those other partners. So as part of that exploration, and again, it really is an exploration, staff is not making any recommendations or supporting any recommendations at this time. We'll come back with what the options are that we've found and see where it goes from there.
Okay. Thank you for giving me that clarity. I think what I'm getting a sense here is that what's being proposed is an exploration with an uncertain expectation of where that exploration leads, as often exploration does. So I have two questions based on that. So it sounds like the motion is asking for staff to do additional work or new work. Would that additional work distract staff from other areas of concern or priority that have already been scoped out and determined to be priorities? Or is this new additional work to be easily achievable within your existing resources? And then I have a follow-up question.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Chair. Councillor Hill generously revised the motion to give us some additional time. We weren't confident with the original motion that we could deliver by Q1, but based on our discussion, he's moved that to Q2. And with the change in timing, we are confident that we can that we can do the work in that timeline.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'll hold off on my second question. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate that we're trying to work towards finding ways to make buildings greener. I just feel that I want to know what the federal government's doing. Are we working with FCM on all the programs that are available and what the ambitions are to make sure that this is across Canada? This is not just Ottawa. I don't think our taxpayers should be burdened with something that is a national problem. Well, it's a global problem, but that's my concern. Also, the fact that it's tied in with home ownership. I'm concerned because we're trying to work on affordable housing and how that works into, because we want encouragement for affordable housing. And I don't know how that would fit into this. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Chair. Yes, we are working with our partners across the country on a range of programs. That includes partners like the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. FCM was critical in providing some of the seed funding, both in terms of a grant and a low interest loan to start the Better Homes Ottawa loan program. Ottawa was one of a number of municipalities that received that funding, and we continue to work with those municipalities as they roll out their respective programs. We're also members of the Canadian Urban Sustainability Practitioners Network, which routinely shares information and tries to align or collaborate on a variety of both programmatic, strategic, and policy issues. In fact, this afternoon, FCM is hosting their first policy table with the 7 largest cities in Canada to speak explicitly about climate change and the role that policy plays in some of these discussions. And as was noted earlier, there is a role for the federal government, particularly as it relates to things like the Mortgage Act. The federal government is also providing a range of funding to homeowners through zero interest grants through the Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation, CMHC, to support some of that retrofit. And we have endeavored to try and align our program, the Better Homes Ottawa Loan Program, with some of the programs that CMHC has rolled out for that zero home interest loan.
And what about the province? Is there any incentives there? Apologize, I haven't been following it lately.
Certainly less discussion at the provincial level. We are working with our provincial counterparts, and in this context, I think it will be important to work with our provincial counterparts, both as the Ontario Building Code is being updated for the energy components, and as the province moves towards higher development standards for new development in the province. So we'll continue to work with our colleagues in Ontario related to that. Some of the things that we'll explore will also be municipal tools that will be exclusive to our colleagues in Ontario, not necessarily those in other provinces.
This seems to be around home ownership and it's just my concern that our push needs to be on affordable housing. So, and greening up affordable housing is a priority. So how could that be integrated into this?
We can certainly take that away. Certainly at the national level, there is substantial funding which is being allocated explicitly for affordable housing. How these could play together, we haven't given any thought yet, but we can take that away for something to consider.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank Councillor Hill for bringing this forward. It was a real interesting for the councillors that attended how you look at an identical set of housing in one area that is powered by natural gas versus the other area. And to Councillor Hill's point, and FCM certainly has done a great job. I think our program's oversubscribed for retrofits, which is great news. People want to do their part. And now talking about new builds, if there's opportunities, exploring that is great. But there is a big segment of, look, let's face it, the people that want to be greener, it's a rich person's game. I mean, I'm not rolling out and buying a Tesla, I can't afford it. But some people actually do want to contribute and protect our environment. You know, this is a no-brainer. I'll steal that from Councillor Carr, that we have a great opportunity here just to go out and look at this. People, if they knew, and a good example would be when Peter Hume decided to go ahead and get a community center because the community felt it was a big deal and applied a local levy within a certain district. If on a new build, that opportunity exists, that doesn't cost taxpayers, it's just baked in, but doesn't affect their opportunity to be able to get that mortgage based on their percentages, why not at least explore it as an idea? I feel I'm in Wally World here arguing about trying to get an opportunity for people, especially younger and our new generations coming down the pipe that want to protect our environment. It behoove us if we didn't allow the discussion or to go out and do the research. And I know Councillor Hill will connect with others about those kind of opportunities between now and council, but I fully intend on supporting this. And I want to thank you for the tour. It was great, and the donuts were terrific as well. So thanks a lot, Councillor Hill.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Kearney. I'll just add my voice to this too. I think it's a bit ironic because we've just been around this table previously in a council talking about the HPDS, right? And obviously that would bake in a lot of this for those larger builds. And obviously it's extremely important that our municipality pass a strong HPDS. I take it we've heard nothing back from the province since we've had these discussions. But this would, in effect, as Councillor Tierney was just saying, bake in a lot of those issues of upfront renovations and retrofits, or it wouldn't even be retrofits, it would be upfront work done that would actually bake in this savings to residents over time who purchase these homes. So I think there's something to be said about the HPDS here and all the good work that staff did on that, and the need for us to accelerate that program, which is within our jurisdiction. This would likely be outside of our jurisdiction. So I think it's a bit ironic. That being said, I think there is some benefit here for staff to look at this. So I'll support the motion. But I think the HPDS is the most important thing that we could bring forward with regard to what we're talking about here today. And I hope those councillors that delayed that with the province understand that we need to pass that as a council here if you're serious about the implications of what you're talking about here. So Councillor Hill, allow you wrap up on your
just point of order, Mr. Chair. My name was mentioned by yourself, so I just want to clarify the difference between where we are going to head with the province. I think we're very clear on that, but to actually bake in that cost is passed on to those new homeowners that want to get into the market, but not allowing them to have that amount of money. A local levy wouldn't be treated the same way. So just for clarification, not for debate necessarily, but I think, going out and having.
Sorry, Councillor Tierney, you cut out a little bit. You cut out a little bit there. I'm not sure if internet's an issue, but fair point that you're making. I guess the big thing for us, I know you're a supporter of the HPDS.
Is terrific, and thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Sorry, you cut out a little bit there, but I know you support the HPDS and just wanted to make sure the province came back. So appreciate that support. And Councillor Hill, do you want to wrap up on your motion?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. No, I appreciate the discussion. I'm very aware that this is kind of a little bit more abstract than perhaps we're comfortable with, but this is just looking to do some research, really. I have done some research and it led me to a path to say, I think there's something here. But obviously there's a function for staff to play in taking this forward. And I guess the last comment I would make is I do see this as being an opportunity that can be synchronized with how we go forward with the implementation of green building code standards for the city. And, this is talking about other levels of government. The green building codes component is, coordination with other levels of government. And so I see those two as quite simpatico. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for your comments, and thank you, colleagues, for the discussion and staff for your support.
Okay, thank you. So can we carry that motion? Carried. Okay, great. So with that, we're at the end of committee here. Any notices of motion for next meeting? I'm seeing none. Any inquiries? Seeing none. Any other business? Okay, seeing none. So we're adjourned and our next meeting will be held on Tuesday, September 19th. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good day.